Hello, everyone. We're recording now, and I'll start with the first slide I have here. I was just, there's a few sort of open threads that we can continue to kind of make a few points on here and there. And one of those is playing to win and understanding that better. Another is the understanding versus control that I talked about last time. And I'll have notes on that from time to time, or it'll just come up in various ways. We'll always be understanding that better and better as we continue. And I'm sure there's other open things as well. But I had a few thoughts about playing to win, and also based on what Shima had asked about the card or the game, right, with the 9-year-old and the 18-year-old and so forth. And so I want to clarify that playing to win, PTW, right on the slide, obviously means playing to win. When I say play to win, I don't mean necessarily that you're playing to beat somebody, or that if you're supposedly playing a game that you're playing to win the game. When I say play to win, I mean you're nailing an objective that you yourself choose. And of course, as I've said, you choose it, and this is kind of an insight, right, that you choose it because it's something you can stack with, that you can stand on or stack with in the future. That's how you know if it's an objective that you want, versus just one that you feel like you should do from your mind, which probably got it from the norms outside of you that got installed in your own mind. Or it just helps you kind of hone your strategy by thinking about what you can stack on when you think about an objective that you're going for. So it has nothing to do, and I didn't really clarify this before, it has nothing to do with beating other people. I lost interest in measuring myself against other people years and years and years ago because, I mean, really the formula for beating someone else is it's just with the talent and the resources that you guys are starting with. Someone might start ahead of the other person, right, generally, with whatever in life, right, dating or playing a particular game online, or of course making money, or in a particular field, or even in a particular company, right? That beating someone else, you start with whatever you start with, talent and resources, and then a lot of it comes down to how much someone wants to channel channel their focus, like Cotton talked about in the last assimilation. I feel like there's maybe one or two other ingredients, but the main, there might not be. The main bottom line is that mostly whoever's willing to focus more, then they're going to generally come out ahead. And also if you don't have blocks, like people restrict themselves or let themselves be restricted in various ways that are unnecessary. So it's sort of a combination of talents, resources, and whatever blocks a person lets block them, either that are real or that are just false ideas in their mind that hold them back. And so then you can generally win any competition against another person if you're willing to focus on it, but then there's nothing to prove at that point. And then you might not win if they start out ahead of you, including how smart they are, right, in that area or in general. And then if they're willing to focus as strongly as you are, and if they can deal with their blocks. So it's not very interesting for me to find out anymore whether I can beat somebody. In some cases I can, in some cases I can't, but it's mostly a matter of focus and what you start with. And that said, I mean, understanding that and having alchemy and everything else, I mean, you can generally win, right? But you're not going to guarantee it, but that's when you're going to focus, not just because you're special and you just emanate greatness. But yet, like intuitively, that's kind of how people want to feel, is that they can just find out that they're so great that they can just kind of win by their, how great they inherently are or something like that. And so it's not about that. And so just kind of generally understanding that, and I never was interested ever again really in competing with somebody else, like for the sake of competing against them. It just doesn't interest me. I prefer single-player computer games, not like multiplayer ones and such. I'm not at all criticizing or turning up my nose to competing with other people. It just doesn't interest me at all. So it has nothing to do with what I mean by playing to win. I have enough to do, right? If I want a challenge, I can go help someone else at this point, right? I either take care of you. If you want a challenge, take care of yourself, get yourself taken care of, and then you can go out and there's lots of people with problems that we can help in some way, shape, or form, right? That kind of takes up enough challenge. Of course, for recreation, we all do recreation and a hobby and so forth, and it can be a fun thing in life to have that. So I'm not denigrating that. I just don't personally get. It doesn't do anything for me at this point to compete against someone else. So that might clear a little bit up. Remember that it means that you're setting the objective that you want to go for and focus on, and not have drag on you, and not have a lot of other goals that are less of a priority, interfering or getting triggered. And then not someone else isn't setting the objective, of course. I'm going to add something here which is fairly profound. I don't know how far I'll get into it necessarily right this moment, or I might loop back around to it in a little bit, either possibly on this webinar or just in this general phase that we're in. But really, and I'll actually say it a different way, and then I'll read what's on the screen. In one sense, one of the things that people do instead of playing to win is they sort of play to find out if they feel like winning, and just kind of often just don't really get out of that mode. So people will start down trying to make a business to kind of see whether they feel like making it work, right? Or work with a client, or get in a relationship in business or romantic, where they're sort of in it to see if they continuously feel like winning. And that's I want to make that distinction, where if the play to win is kind of like expressly to make it so that's not what you're doing. You don't want to, again, that of course is a restatement of your thinking whether you want to win. But it's maybe a useful restatement that might be a little eye-opening. If you find yourself, you want to kind of monitor when you're going after your objectives, and see whether you're just kind of in it to see whether you feel like sort of investing, because the root of that, where that's coming from, is that people really do stuff in life often. It tends to just be so much about their self-image in various ways, whether they realize it or not. And so often people go for a goal in order to validate their self-image. This is what I have written on the slide. Including, they can even get in a romance, even literally get all the way to get married. And they don't realize they're doing it to like validate their self-image, right? They want an image of being married, and then they like the person affirming that they're attractive and that they're someone that the person wants to marry. And very often people are not in a marriage to win. And of course, by win, I don't mean like beating your spouse, literally or metaphorically, but I mean win means you create a great relationship together, right? Where has to be a shared vision of some sort, and then you're creating that together. And a win means you're achieving that objective of creating a relationship and being happy, consistently, and have a way to work through bottlenecks that come up. So this is very, very common, and you can also, one of the reasons this matters is more than just for yourself. It's very important to compensate for this in some way, or at least be aware of it. So it's part of what you understand about people, is that often they're going for goals in order to validate their self-image rather than the objective. And that's why it's a common thing where people will achieve a goal, and then what do? They feel like they need to set another goal, and the previous one almost does nothing for them anymore, because they didn't pick it in the first place to stack much with the next thing. Of course, it's fine to set a new goal after you achieve something, but really it's not about that. It's that you're going for something more ultimately. There's the final ultimate goal of the world being perfect, and so forth, that we all want to bring about at some point. But then even something that's more that's not so ultimate, like that, of making a business work, or even in a one client consultant relationship, you can go for one goal that'll stack, that'll get you somewhere, and then you can go for the next one. But when people get in a pattern of they just set a goal for the sake of feeling like they achieved a goal, right, essentially, where there's not a clarity about stacking, then and where it like makes, I've even heard like success gurus talk about, okay, so you achieve a goal and then you're happy for a few minutes, but you don't want to stay comfortable there. You want to go for the next one, right? Well, in a sense, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you're kind of just like a rat on a treadmill, or a rat on a wheel, right? Or a rat in a maze and a hamster on a wheel, or a person on a treadmill, if I mixed a few metaphors together. But if you're in any kind of pattern where you're kind of setting a goal just for the sake of striving or just for the sake of challenging yourself, people that talk in that way, like, oh, I just like to challenge myself, well, that's actually it's incorrect. That it's incorrect in the sense of effectiveness in life. Like, again, there's enough real stuff to accomplish both for yourself and for other people that's actually going to make you happier. Like, you're going to be actually better off, right? If you're going to challenge yourself, well, doesn't it make sense to challenge yourself going after a goal that's going to stack, rather than going after one that isn't? There's an idea with hobbies, right, where you're just sort of enjoying yourself within a hobby, and I can revisit that or think that through a little bit extra. But on the in terms of just what I do, right, in my life, is just like watching a movie or reading a book. It's completely valid to just go read a book or watch a movie at times, or watch a TV show, or play a game of some sort. Even then, though, I mean, when you're doing any of those things, you're kind of identifying with the character in the book, right? The character in the movie, character in a video game, or something that you're doing in a game. But the thing is, with those, they're clearly labeled as such. That and that I got that out of my head just now, because that's something I'd known for a while. I didn't have it prepared on my slides or my notes. But as I was thinking about it, that's what I like about when something's clearly labeled as a hobby, or then it's kind of categorized or quarantined as such. You just don't. One of the things I liked about separating playing games like a computer game from what some people would do is they would kind of blend work and their hobby, and they would just create drama in work, or just do stuff that really had nothing to do with making money, and it was just sort of like, because it was their hobby too. And if you clearly label it as such, I'm going to go create drama just to solve it, having to do with work. As a hobby, then okay. But if you're confusing yourself and think that you're actually accomplishing something that is going to stack when you're not, is a good way to understand this. And then having time as part of a hobby, and I'm labeling a hobby as something that just inherently you just enjoy, you can look forward to. I think that's actually important. I think that it adds a certain type of spice and motivation and sort of meaning to your life that you can sort of look forward to, that if you're just working and there's not a lot, like some kind of fun thing to look forward to, I think that actually causes an issue. So I like the idea of having a hobby. I think it's fine to also put a hobby aside for months or even years if you're really getting momentum and trying to break through with something. Either way, but what you clearly don't want to do is be doing something where it's not stacking. It's not like a hobby in and of itself has its own benefits. It adds like kind of spice and meaning to other things that you're doing. It can allow you an outlet to explore and try strategy and learn and understand things. I find having played a lot of different strategy games and using it as an experimental place to develop, then I find it very useful in that way, for real. But I wouldn't fool myself in saying like, oh, I'm just going to play a computer game and that's going to help me make money because it's going to hone my strategy, and so on and so forth. But what you don't want to do is confuse what you're doing for a hobby with just something that you're striving for. In any of those cases, just validating your self-image is not. It feels to your mind like it's going to stack. And when we talk about self-image, this is the type of topic we want to be talking about in this kind of phase of alchemy. I'm going to touch on some things about knowing what's true in this webinar too. But think about the thing. It feels like it's stacking to your mind until you understand things more clearly and properly. But like because what the mind is going to do by default is there's going to be a sense of, well, the greater my self-image is, the more I'm validated, then the more confident I feel, and then I can accomplish more because I feel confident. But it's really just setting up a bunch of false feedback. It's all just a false narrative if you just look at it more clearly that way, like it is kind of outlined. Maybe it's a little bit like with the stock market, where if the stock market goes up, it doesn't really stack. Like if one day it goes up 100, that doesn't necessarily form. Sometimes technical analysis, they can say like, oh, there's a new floor that's formed, and so there could be a little bit of a psychological aspect that does stack, but the part of it in another way it doesn't stack, right? Like if just because it goes up 100 doesn't mean that there's a new total floor built in. Let me try to make sure I explain this to you clearly about self-image. At least we can have the question open now of understanding why it is that we don't want to live this way, where we feel like we're making progress in life by validating our sense of how smart we already are, how good we already are. Right? Again, when I put it that way, it probably further gives you some insight into the issue with it. You're not really going to have a problem as you gain understanding, as you gain skill and expertise and resources based on that, like ranking websites or building business relationships that are more ongoing, where you and the people you're in relationship with have more experiences together and so forth. That you're not going to have a problem having more confidence if you're just actually increasing your understanding, right? If you're going after objectives that stack for real, that are picked for a good reason, and achieving those by playing to win is all going to be more effective for your confidence, and things related to your confidence, like feeling calm and so forth, and stable. Then if we go to the tried and true example of a guy dating, if he's just dating in order to feel validated, right, and just having girls tell him how great he is and sleep with him and all that, is that really going to be the most effective way for him to get the relationship that he wants, right? Pretty clearly not, right? It's going to make him very easily manipulated. If he has money, it'll be easy for women to part him of it, right, and so forth. So it's very normal to get sucked into this, where you have goals, where you're validating your self-image. And it's fragile, right? You have a success, but then you need to dumb down your goals, right? That's why people play to find out whether they still feel like winning, right? They're playing, but they're watching out because they want to sort of have a way to drop the goal psychologically if they feel like maybe they won't achieve it, because they need to do that. Just like if you're dating and if you feel rejection coming, or if you're trying to get clients and you feel rejection might be around the corner, and if you feel like you have to get validated in order to have confidence, and a rejection will permanently set you back, and a validation will permanently be something you can stack with, it's just a poor strategy from start to finish, right, to think that way and to do things that way. So I think that's all I'll say about that for now, and then it's something that you can look into for yourself, and I'll almost certainly expand on this more, and I'll have more thoughts about it. Is a little bit of a fairly quick thought that I had for notes to cover for this webinar, so I don't want to get too bogged down in it, and I want to perhaps prepare a little bit extra before trying to muse about it too much in front of you. I like to do some musing and kind of thinking in front of you on these webinars, because I think that gives you a different angle on things that will help in a couple of ways. One is just kind of a little bit like over the shoulder, right, showing like search engine optimization over the shoulder, showing kind of me thinking and musing and taking a look at ideas in front of you, like I do privately, of course. Mostly I do it behind the scenes to prepare. And also it actually reduces intimidation, right? I don't want to be coming across. This is a very important part of my understanding about any kind of teaching or coaching, is that I don't want it to be like there's one category of me and there's another category that you're in, and that we're somehow different. And I'm like the expert, or the guy that has it, and you have a different identity than that. I want us all to feel more. We can feel like we're in the same category, except for maybe I've pioneered a bunch and I've worked on this a lot. That's great, right? I have some experience I can share with you, but I don't want it to feel like a permanent difference in categories between you and myself, where you kind of like take on an identity as a student in any way, because then that's shrinking. It shrinks you. It limits you to think that way. And so by me musing out loud, it kind of breaks that barrier. And so I do that on purpose for that reason as well. I did that even back when I was teaching strategy for the game, for Magic the Gathering, our first online business. We had a membership site for that. And I would let people in on my thinking for both of those reasons there too, sometimes, or often there. Here, if I did too much musing in front of you, it would take even more than the 30 sessions that we have. So I want to keep some lid on it, but I also want to let you in on it from time to time. Okay, let's take a moment here, and I'll take a look at anything that someone might want to post, and then I'll switch. It's all ultimately goes to the same topic, right, that we're talking about, the same with the self-image, playing to win, and how to know what's true and all that. But I'll kind of switch gears a little bit within the general phase that we're in a moment. Right, yeah, that's right, Mike. Hey, David, how would we know a goal is stackable? What are the characteristics of it? Or am I overthinking it? One characteristic could be a total floor that gets achieved when you get a goal. Okay, stackable, I'm going to, again, think out loud for a moment here. So if we, and which means a little bit of poking around for a moment, when we think of the idea of alchemy, right, where we're doing building blocks and so forth, then, like, okay, so let's say with my business, with OMG Machines, suppose I just wanted to make a certain number of sales of a product in order to feel like I hit my goal of making such and such number of sales, and plus I could brag to myself that we'd made the business took in this amount of money and so forth, or whatever money, then that is more like a self-image type goal, right? Like where if I really examine it and I'm honest with myself, then I'm trying to hit that number of sales, or I'm trying to hit that number of our business doing whatever it is, just to sort of, again, just to kind of feel validated. If instead I think, all right, what could I build with, right, in the future? Now, a little bit of that I could build on. It would give me some money to invest. So there's not like you totally can't stack with making sales and having some cash. But there's a way where you can think even more specifically what would help stack. Certainly having a plan for the product to be successful, right? In some niches and types of businesses, it's normal for things to be successful. In the niche that we're in with OMG Machines, it's not that normal for people to be particularly successful with it. So I can think of stacking in terms of that way, where I imagine more of a total vision that has something to do with a total amount of members and sales that I might want to make, but also has to do with success of people, and that ultimately is based on no matter how many sales I make and however successful people are, I'm building my understanding. In many cases, I think about the final thing that I might want to do, and then for my sub-goals, it tends to involve doing different things that no matter what, they're going to increase my understanding. Would also be stackable. So getting married itself is not that stackable. It in one sense, it's a bit of a floor in the sense that now you're married, and that kind of gives you an extra sort of bond, right? If we go on, let me just, again, I'm still thinking kind of out loud. If you get married and you're like have very romantic times, or you start dating and you have a lot of romantic times, and you go on a vacation together, and you imagine you're going on a vacation and you imagine how nice it's going to be and you're excited about it and you plan it, then that's the kind of thing that might not be very stackable, and it might even just backfire. It might just not hit your expectations and so on and so forth. If instead you have an objective to sort of develop a shared vision together, where you guys, in a series of conversations or even just an agreement, that you start talking to the other person about what you guys envision as a happy relationship, how you guys will deal with it, to discuss things when you guys have things to work out. Conversations like that can potentially stack in a good way. So you can literally have a strategic objective in a romantic relationship to work out a bit of an outline or a framework, a foothold, a place to stand for what you'll do when one of you feels like you have something to work out. And it's not that easy sometimes to have to figure that to make that happen with somebody, right? And to do that with anything with somebody, you can't come over the top and sort of pressure them. You need to understand them better and kind of draw it out of them. But if you achieve that objective where you guys have a meeting of the minds that way and a bit of a framework that you've talked through about what to do when either of you wants to work on something, right, in your relationship or towards a vision of what you want, then that's something that can stack versus just the idea of taking a vacation together. It might not be something that stacks, and it could even turn into a bit of a mini disaster. Or you could achieve it. It could be fun, but it's not really a building block that you can build with or do anything with in the future. And it could be, or an aspect of it could be, but then if you design it that way, then it could be. But at least you want to think in those terms. Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate that. Such good stuff. Right. You want to, I'll get to this, where you want to think through in scenarios to really make sure that they stack. So something I'll get to can help with that. Neil Gregory, husband and wife, what's wrong with our marriage? Marriage counsel, I'm sorry, but your marriage isn't stackable. Husband and wife, oh, yeah, or at least you want to have aspects of it, right, that are stackable. And yeah, your marriage itself, I really thought this way when I got married. I thought, okay, now I'm married, and sorry, in a way that turned out to be correct, at least experientially correct. Where it provided a certain support and kind of whole background where then I was able to strive in my career and take it way to the next level that way. So my marriage in general was something that I could sort of stand on and that provided support. And also as a guy, probably as a girl at times too, plenty. But anyway, as a person, it's just being single and dating is a distracting thing, right? And so eliminating that distraction frees up a heck of a lot of resource and focus. Dave, when you talked about playing to win, it reminds me about how alienated kids like me were so obsessed with hobbies to gain status that many times when we're older we tend not to follow these hobbies, right? Like if you're not alienated. Yeah, and I think having a hobby is pretty nifty. I sort of have kind of a working framework for life where you have to rest, like literally sleep a certain amount and even sometimes just rest a little bit. And then you need to deal with money in some way, like a career. You probably want some sort of romance. Or you could just say at least like a social framework for yourself. So rest, career, romance, and then, but then having, or maybe you could say romance and social, career, rest, and then a hobby. I think a hobby is one of those ingredients. Or maybe I was thinking I put kind of romance and social in one little bucket. So I know I'm not writing this on the screen, but rest, something with career or money to deal with it, stability, social, romance, but then having a hobby and then having like an ultimate sort of sense of purpose is probably a good 5 things to as a go-to framework if you don't have something else. Yeah, he's been very helpful just in practice with OMG and doing accounting and so forth, which was really a bottleneck for us. Okay, I will move along here. All right, let's go to another slide. All right, the CF stands for consciousness field. Now, when we're talking about how to know what's true, then So much of the battle is, or so much of winning the war or whatever is just this original distinction, right, with differentiating your consciousness field from the world of reasons or code, right? Or and let me just go straight into talking about something here. I'm kind of feeling it. Let me see if there's a slide that's good for it here. All right, I switched slides here. Let me point something out to you. You guys, as alchemists here, you're developing a clarity that no one outside of alchemy is going to have. Now, we're going to want them to have it anyway because the world will be nicer, people will be less violent, as I've said, and so forth. But at least for now, you also get the benefit of it yourself, where that can really help you not really feel like there's competition in life. Let's just start with a very simple. Let me put it this way. And this is not a trick question. Just answer this for yourself normally. I'm not going to ask you to post anything or anything, but just the street outside your house. What color is it? It's probably like gray, right? Of course, it's not a trick question. Of course, there's some yellow markings or white markings, but basically it's gray, right? So you would affirm that. And I am using this to point out an interesting contradiction or an interesting blurry spot for people, but it's not a trick question. So we would, under normal circumstances, we just affirm that the road outside our house is gray. Now, let me ask you this. If you close your eyes or if you're not looking at the road outside your house, does it still exist? Or if you imagine yourself looking at the road and then closing your eyes, would you affirm that the road still exists after you close your eyes? So I think pretty clearly we'd all answer yes to both those questions. Yeah, the road is gray, basically, and maybe with some markings, or black or whatever. And then also that it does not disappear if we close our eyes. So what's my point there? The interesting thing is there's actually an inherent kind of mutually exclusive nature to answering those two questions. So black or gray only exists, as in that color of the road, only exists inside of your consciousness field, right? Only exists, would you say, inside of your awareness or the visual image that you see. We all really understand ultimately that there's no black inherent outside the world, right? But then we both say that the road, the road is like two words that refers to something specific, right? So if we ask one type of question, then the road, those words, the words the road refer, or the road outside your home, that phrase, it refers to something that can be black or gray, which must be, again, like an image or something that's inherently in your consciousness field. But then when we say, does it still exist when you're not looking at it or when you close your eyes, and we affirm that, well, now we're affirming something that is not in your consciousness field, right? So now we have this phrase, and depending on the question, we answer it as if it exists in your consciousness field, and the other question as if it exists outside of your consciousness field, and they're mutually exclusive, because whatever exists outside your consciousness field that the road outside your home, that phrase refers to, can't be actually gray or black, because you're not aware of it. It's gray and black only exists in your awareness, right? Even our typical view of the world, it's at least made of molecules that are colorless, right? So here's the blurriness. Normally what people do is, the distinction we have is there's a consciousness field, which is everything you're aware of. You don't walk around in the world. You walk around, in essence, within your consciousness field, and you don't walk around. You feel like you walk around. When you identify with your body, then you're so much like in a virtual reality situation, you're not walking around inside the computer or inside the code. You're walking around within an experience, or you feel like you're walking around within an experience, but that experience only exists as an experience. Then there is an external world, but the external world is not made of the same type of stuff, and it doesn't have the same type of characteristics as the world of your consciousness field. And then on top of that, there's beings, which have the capacity and the quality of being able to be aware of consciousness fields. beings are neither reasons, they're not made up of external stuff, code, and they're not made up, and they're not within consciousness fields. They're a third thing. So normally people don't have those distinctions. So what happens is all three of those things are actually blurred together into one view of the world. And that, remember, I've talked about the starter kit that we have. The starter kit helps us tread water or survive. But what happens with our minds and with institutions and non-conscious process in general is they're always reverting to survival as if that's their purpose. And so people will, even when people try to find meaning or purpose in their lives or making the world better, it all ends up being just this treading water stuff where it's just maintaining the struggle. But so the maintaining the struggle thing is a little bit of an aside, but it kind of gives some context to what I'm saying. The core of what I'm saying here is that in the normal view of the world, of the people out there that you're dealing with, they conflate. They have a model of the world that blurs together beings, consciousness fields, and all the rest, and reasons, into a model that we're all familiar with, right? We live it, we grew up with it, it's extremely familiar to us. The normal view of reality blurs all those things together into this idea that there's like one physical world, there's people that walk around, and those people have minds, and those minds have consciousness, and maybe pets do. I'm just giving the general view of the world, right? Maybe there's a God, things like that. But there's basically this one world in people's mind that all these things coexist in, and it's all, again, all blurred together. And so then when we come to dealing with words and what words mean and the nature of a definition of a word, people are impossibly unfixably, I'll just make up a word, I'm not thinking of whatever the real word is, but they're unfixably confused when like you can take, for example, legal language. In legalese, like legal language is an attempt to get well, one story about it anyway. We could say that ultimately it evolves into survival and therefore money for lawyers, right? And where other people can't speak it, so we have to hire lawyers for it. But on the other hand, if we just forget about that for a moment, it's an attempt to try to narrow words down into that can't wiggle around as much. And even there, obviously, they themselves understand that they're not really succeeding with that, right? They have things like, they're always using words like what a reasonable person might do to this or a reasonable person might do to that, which is a reasonable thing to write, but it's certainly not exactly precise, right? There's no way. And of course, if we just look at what's going on with it, you have like laws, interpretations of laws, commentary on laws, and then you have case law and decisions and all that. So we show even with the legal system how an attempt to have precision with meanings. In essence, it's sort of one outlet for like applied philosophy, right? There's philosophers who call themselves philosophers who try to work on things having to do with precision in words. I think Bertrand Russell really tried strongly to do this, but he got, well, according to me, I'll assert he got nowhere. Some people respect him to some degree, but I mean he was like an atheist, I think. So he didn't even get to square one with figuring out what's going on in the world. So sometimes philosophers try to get clear, but the legal system and the legal profession is an example of sort of practical applied attempts at being clear with words, and it fails pretty miserably. It doesn't fail completely. Certainly the words have some meaning and a fairly decent amount of it, but then there's a whole lot of wiggle room. So it's hopeless is maybe when I was talking about unfixably. People are hopelessly screwed. There's no way. If they don't have the distinction that I'm giving you in alchemy, this fundamental distinction about consciousness fields and then building from there, figuring out there must be beings, figuring out that the external world is composed basically of reasons. It's not composed fundamentally of molecules and atoms. The molecules and atoms certainly exist, but they exist, they're not ultimately made of matter. They're like made of reasons, and then it's a model. of how things work. It's a model that God's self could be using, or something maybe deeper, but it's a model that works quite well, and is certainly certainly has a lot of accuracy to it. So I'm not denying the existence at all of atoms and molecules and so forth, but they're not fundamental to reality. Fundamental is the idea of reasons, just like our computer game metaphor or illustration makes it kind of easy to see, where you have the video game world, the forest that the guy you're running around in as a guy with a gun, and there's objects that they don't code, I'm sure, for they code for objects, right? They don't code for like molecules and atoms when they're coding for a computer game to make the forest, but they do code for objects of some sort that make up the various computer game world. And so those objects sort of really exist in a sense, but they're made of code, right? And it helps us to understand the objects if we understand them ultimately in terms of coding. So you are able to not be hopelessly confused. It can be perhaps confusing to make the transition, but where everyone starts out, they literally are hopelessly confused. The only way out of the confusion is what we're talking about here, right? People can use a different terminology for it if they want. Someone else could figure out the same thing, call it something different, and explain it differently than me. But whoever did that would be referring to the same concepts. Either they'd be wrong or they'd be right. The idea of a consciousness field is not a theory. It has to be correct, right? You experience it, and then there have to be reasons for it. So that's reality. And you can't understand what words really refer to until and unless you understand the idea about beings, consciousness field, and then the world of reasons. And again, the world of reasons contains the physical world, the mind, and so forth. And concepts don't have like an independent existence necessarily. They exist kind of as describing relationships. But once again, now that we have the distinction, there's relationships in the world of reasons, and there's relationships in your consciousness field, and those are two different like worlds or realms or however you want to call it. Until and unless we distinguish those things, we can't think straight. It's not possible. Sometimes, and this is why I made this little diagram here. This is one of my simplistic diagrams. So let's suppose I had some lines that were broken, which I don't have drawn here. Then this little O, I wasn't able to find a better way to represent this, but the O could move around. If there was like a maze that could be navigated, it could like if I drew a semicircle around this O in the middle, right? This shape, this object in the middle. You can think of this even as like standing for a person who's walking around in a field. If there's a fence, but the fence has a hole in it, then this guy could get through that fence. But let's suppose there's an unbroken fence. Then in 2 dimensions, there's an unbroken line. In 2 dimensions, this guy can't get out. But if he had a 3rd dimension, if he could just jump over the fence, then like vertical, right, then he could get out. So there are activities in life, there's areas in life, there's questions in life, there's whole fields and topics where without this distinction in alchemy, you couldn't get out of them. You couldn't break out. Other times, you don't need this distinction of alchemy. Obviously, you succeed plenty, get results that you expected and wanted to get prior to meeting me, right, and prior to us discussing this. But the difference is that there's a whole number of other things that you'd be locked out of without this distinction that we're covering here in phase 2. You can't really understand love properly. You can't understand what words refer to properly you can't get beneath your norms and your standards in the things that you feel like you should do and you should feel. People are locked into those things, and the only way out without alchemy is to fight like at the level of norms and standards. People normally don't even do that, right? But you can sort of intentionally say, look, I want to make more money, so I'm going to get myself around people who are making more money. That you can do without alchemy. A lot of people don't even have the awareness to do that, but you can figure that out without getting underneath your norms and standards. You're kind of operating at that level and trying to surround yourself with different norms and standards. When you're doing that, however, you're still going to have a struggle, and you're still going to need to keep that external surroundings of the better norms and standards, the ones that you want, around you. Metaphorically speaking, you have to keep going to church, right? I'm only speaking metaphorically. That had nothing to do with criticizing church or anything like that. But it's like you have to go week after week, so to speak, to get filled up again, to feel it, to get your norms and standards adjusted back again. It's like going to the chiropractor week after week. If now it absolutely could be the case, I don't know, or in some cases it's something that could be fixed, right? But if you imagine it not being fixed, but you have to go back week after week to the chiropractor, and at least if the chiropractor can make you feel better for a week, then you can go back next week. So that's cool. But better is to be able to fix it. So you can't get all the way under your norms and standards, which keep affecting your results and pulling. There's like a current that is affecting you no matter what, with other goals that you, more on the surface, that you think you might want to go for. You can't get underneath it. You can only fight like at the level of it without alchemy. What we'll talk about here, and as always, you don't have to get it from me, but practically speaking, that's where it's going to be coming from right now. All right. As we're dealing with phase 2, and I'm talking about this stuff, it's about making progress at different times. It'll be a little bit like popcorn, where it pops, different. You can stick popcorn in a microwave and it'll pop. Each individual kernel will pop when it pops. So, when we talk about these topics, I keep talking and hitting it from different angles and continuing on, and different things will pop for you at different times. You don't need to be in a rush. Let me look at what else I wrote on here. How to think. When does our unique distinction matter? I gave a little bit of indication of that, and I can develop that more sometime soon. And then I wrote when the consciousness field meaning is importantly different than the code meaning. All right. All right. Let's look at. I talked about this, and it was an alchemy that I said I was pretty excited about. It might have been the second one, might have been the third one. Let me just pause my screen for a second here, and I'm going to see if I can find an old slide. Everyone can rest their brain for a second, including myself. Let's see here. Ah, found it. Okay, back to showing my screen. All right, let's see if we'll poke with this and see where it gets us for a little while. So previously I wrote that it had to do with, okay, so goal flexibility. Let's see here. So this has to do with goal, okay, and this slide that I'll get back to was showing you a way that there was something that was going to interfere with your ability to drop goals when they were no longer the right time for it. And I've given you different angles on this, including when I talked with playing to win and having strategic objectives and tactical objectives, and setting in advance the understanding that you might drop a tactical objective at a certain point if there's an expiration date, and so on and so forth. Building in the more flexibility, the more proper flexibility and strength we can plan for, the better. The general question of what will give us more strength and give us more flexibility regarding ourselves, our mind, anything else in life that's more specific than that, is generally a good question to ask, right? You want to be strong and flexible. And if you don't have clear clarity, then that's going to limit both your flexibility and your strength. You can imagine a parent where if they don't have clarity on where the boundaries are with their child, then they're going to be sort of both less flexible and less strong. And same thing if you're dealing with a client, right? Not to compare the client to a child. But if you don't know your boundaries clearly, right, and cottons, velvet ropes, and so forth, then you might think you're more flexible, but the trouble is when you start to approach the gray area of your boundaries, you tend to sort of try to be rigid too early, right? So you actually be less flexible when you find yourself approaching what might be a boundary at times, right? And a parent with their child might be less flexible with their child and give them less leeway with things because they're worried about like a slippery slope or something like that. And then, but weirdly at the same time, they come across less strong, and so their child feels like it wants to test the boundaries and have a sense, and so you both come across as weaker and less flexible. When you get your distinction, the more clarity you have, the more you have both strength and flexibility, which is a happy feeling. In life overall, if you feel strong and flexible and adaptable, you can do a quick mental exercise right now and think, all right, let's suppose I imagine that whatever challenges come up over the next year, even if something that would be kind of a major setback in one way of looking at it, first of all, my priorities will change, right? If there's a major event that happens or new input, then I'll probably feel energized to deal with it. So the more flexible you imagine yourself, including even how you'll feel about taking action, the more you believe you can adapt to whatever life throws at you. Don't you find yourself feeling happy if you think about that? If you think, all right, no matter what happens over the next year, I'll adapt to it. I'll be flexible. But I'll have a calm, solid strength ultimately that I'll bring to bear. I'll be standing on a firm foundation, and then I'll adapt to whatever comes up, including my feelings about what I want to be doing. Even if I have to spend 100 hours dealing with an issue that comes up, when it comes up, I'll feel like doing that because it'll be a priority. It'll matter at the time, even if I wouldn't choose for that issue to come up. Isn't that a nice feeling, right? So the more you're clear, the more you feel strong and flexible, you'll feel generally happier about life. And that comes from clarity. Now, something that interferes with us being strong and flexible, and I'm using this also as an example of what was on my other slide, just to kind of keep everything tied together. And originally I talked about the two ideas of what the road outside your home might refer to. It can refer to something that's in your consciousness field, that realm, or it can refer to something that exists in the world of reasons, right, in the physical world, which is a subset of the world of reasons, the code, the external code. With you having that distinction, you're going to be able to navigate issues in life and or in topics and situations where that distinction is going to really matter, and other people won't be able to navigate it. It'll take a little while to get used to the distinction, perhaps. It might take us talking a bit and you thinking about it a bit and so forth. And it might develop over a few webinars. And then here's an example of something that can be navigated differently by having the distinction. So in the normal way of looking at things, maybe shouldn't call it normal, but in the default way of looking at things, the starter kit way of looking, then, and I've referred to this, is your mind redefines the idea of good, because to your mind that exists in the world of reasons and is trying to just help itself and your body survive within the world of reasons, it's just there to keep you alive long enough to to be able to the parallel track, right, where you're really achieving real purpose and understanding, and seeking to understand God, each other, caring about other people, and so forth. So it's just trying to keep you alive long enough. That's what your starter kit is there for. people conclude in various ways that it's all that exists as a starter kit, the default in life. By default, they conclude that it's default. They don't realize anything else exists besides that. And the greatest good is just things that help us survive better and longer and more comfortably in the default way of thinking. Of course, that isn't the greatest good. The greatest good is breaking out of that and not just staying alive comfortably, but breaking through to wonderful perfection and more increasing good. All right. So your mind exists in the world of reasons. It's all it can see is within the world of reasons. There is nothing else. So it builds a whole model of the world where everything's blurred together, right? It isn't even a model of the world of reasons. It's just a model that's a blurry mishmash of all of it, beings, consciousness field, and so forth. But it's not conscious, so it's trying to blur it together without even having a sense of consciousness. So good only exists, good is like color, in that it only exists in consciousness field, in the realm of consciousness field, of yours and other people. Good doesn't exist anywhere else. Normally, by default, people think that good resides in objects and in situations. Now, the reason why you feel good is found within the world of reasons, right? I just used that word. The reason why you feel good, right? The reason why you'll feel good in your consciousness field, or that you'll feel bad, or the way to get rid of bad, will have to do with ingredients being mixed. And ingredients get mixed in both places, depending on how you look at it. But in the world of reasons, reasons can be mixed together, different reasons, just like mixing in the physical world, right? If you mix physical objects together and you get a result, if you put a bike together, then it gets put together in the world of reasons, right? You'll have a counterpart to it that you're aware of when you're thinking about it or looking at it, the bike. But you assemble it, right? You're assembling things. If you eat something that mixes with your particular taste buds, or if you listen to music, and now we're just thinking the world of reasons, right? If your body that's in the world of reasons listens to music, then that mixes with the preferences in your mind, right? Then your auditory system in your head, right? That all exists in the world of reasons, the realm of reasons. That mixes together, right? The sound waves, the music, we say, mixes with your particular mind and auditory system, and to some people and if that feels good, if that mixture feels good, given the receptors, so to speak, in your mind, if something mixes and is in a way that it wants, then you'll get a good feeling in your consciousness field. But good resides in your consciousness field in the sense of the conscious experience of good. There's mixing that takes place. There's a precursor. The reasons for good exist in the world of reasons. I couldn't talk that way if we didn't have this whole distinction. Without this distinction, if we were having a normal topic of what's good, people are like, well, who really knows what's good? Good is subjective. It's how you define it, right? And people just say this stuff that once you start to see things clearly, and you very well may already do so, who knows? But as you get this more and more, if you've gotten it, whatever, wherever you're at with this, you can see the ridiculousness or the hopelessness of the way that people normally talk about this stuff. They just have no foothold. They don't have it. They're just looking at something blurry and they can't see distinctly. It's like if you have blurry vision with your eyes, if you have 20/100 vision or whatever, then no matter how much you squint, right, or stare at something fairly far away, then it's just going to be blurry, no matter how hard you try. And that's how it is with people. Metaphorically, if we're competing with people in any area where these distinctions will come into play, then it's like we're playing baseball where we have good, clear vision and other people have really blurry vision. There's no chance, no matter how physically fit they are, no matter how skilled they might otherwise be, if their vision is screwed up, they just can't compete. Okay, so now your mind, now on the slide here I wrote, is it good because of a goal, right? That's what your mind concludes. Your mind has no sense of a consciousness field, just has this blurry model of the world that jumbles it all together. And so the only idea or association that your mind can have of what's good is relative to goals that it has. So to your mind, good gets twisted and redefined as that which helps progress a goal. So now, if we if it has a goal for your self-image to be validated, and it decides that something that's going to be an example of that is if a girl compliments you and flatters you, then and I understand there's women listening too. You understand what I mean? I'm just using that referring quickly to that metaphor or that illustration. If a girl flatters you, then we can think, oh, that, and then literally a guy can think in that illustration, oh, that's good, right? Or if a girl jumps in bed with him or whatever, oh, that's good. Why? Well, it isn't necessarily good, right? And it also we can now construct. We can learn that definitions can be constructed. And so someone could say, well, it depends what you mean by good. Well, we no longer need to make a statement like that. We can construct a meaning. So good can be constructed to have different nuances, and we can modify the word good with something else. But what I mean is something can be said to be good if we're doing a situation and it feels good right now. So if someone feels like they're having a good experience while there's someone jumping into bed with them, then in that sense, then it is good. Right, the experience is good. But if we have a different idea of like net good, is that situation going to lead to a net benefit to the person or a net amount of good? It may not. It may, but it may not. And if the strategy is kind of inherently flawed, where a guy wants one thing, or if a long-term healthy relationship is going to lead to a lot more good than being on a treadmill with the wrong kind of dating, where the person gets taken advantage of and they're heartbroken and nervous all the time, and it's like they're almost on drugs, and they can't function very well in their career and so forth, right? Because their priorities are messed up and they're distracted with this ongoing dating thing done wrong and feeling validated. Then that's not probably going to lead to more net good for the person. So we don't have to say it depends how you define good. We can construct what we mean and then create a phrase or a two-word phrase like immediate feeling of good or net good, right? And we construct it from properly, from our consciousness field, from a proper understanding of the world. People without this distinction, like our mind, by default, redefines the idea of good to be situations or objects, happenings, events that further its goals, and then that event, that trigger, gets labeled as good, and then we can't drop it because we're like, but it's good if this girl likes me, but it's good, right? And again, but the meaning of good there to our mind is, well, it furthers. I thought it seemed to further a goal, but now we can't drop it because good got redefined. If we understand good to mean something that actually leads to a good experience, and then if we develop strategic objectives that are going to stack our good experience and help us build good experiences in the future, right? Then it's like snowball, right? The goodness that we have, then we have a different understanding of good, and we have an understanding that we couldn't have without this proper understanding of what words refer to. And you might say, well, wait, David, did you tell me what words refer to? What words refer to is words. We need to distinguish whether we can construct the meaning of a word or a phrase of words where we're aware of whether we're building something that's inherently part of a consciousness field or whether it's part of the world of reasons, and distinguish and refer to it differently. If we're talking about a tree or Bob, I don't mean a particular Bob. You can think of whatever you want for Bob, but like a guy named Bob that we know, Bob has, the word Bob actually refers to different things depending on whether we're referring to our aspects of our conscious experience related to Bob, or Bob's body in the world of reasons, in the physical world, which is in the world of reasons, Bob's mind, Bob's personality, Bob, the being who's aware of Bob's consciousness field, who also has a mind and a body, right, attached to all that. Then we can distinguish now. And it doesn't all get conflated and blurred into one thing. And that's just going to end up, it's going to keep popping up for us, that ability to distinguish, this ability, a different way to understand words, where we're constructing them. And the basis for constructing and thinking is going to lie within our consciousness field, right? The only thing we're ever aware of directly is our consciousness field. I could say by definition it's the only thing we're aware of, but really by construction it is the only thing we're aware of. Our constructed understanding of consciousness field is that which we're aware of. So this might be making your head hurt for now. As you transition, it might be making my head hurt. But this is, as we make this transition together, as we understand this, and as I know you understand it, then we're just on a totally different playing field in life, and we can then think and talk in a very different way. I'm going to say one last thing here, and then we can just talk a little bit together. But it's a pretty cool thing. I'm going to want to say something about scenarios, and then next webinar I'll probably look back on these same slides a bit and have some further things to say about each of them. Nope, not that one. Nope. See, where do I say scenario? Ah, here, got it. Gave you guys some little glimpse at some slides there. I'm about to say something fairly simple and graspable and profound and useful, which is, and I like to do that at least once within a webinar. And it's this second. It's not this first statement, meaning exists within consciousness field. I can get back to that when we go back over these slides in the next webinar. But so I'm just going to do kind of a whole pass, I think, through, or maybe I'll have some further modification and notes when I do the pass, but next week over all of this. But let me leave you with this, and I'll develop this as well, and I'll develop the idea of scenarios further. But I think I've been developing the idea of what I mean by thinking in scenarios the whole way through, and I'll continuously look to be more specific and give you more angles on what I mean. And a quick example of what I mean by thinking in a scenario is like I've talked about with clients, right? If you're going to meet with a client, then one thing that people might do before meeting with a client that's an example of not thinking in scenarios is they'll just have like thoughts, like words come into their head, feelings, like, oh, I hope it goes well. All right, I'll talk about this, then I'll talk about that. I hope they like me. Okay, I'm nervous. All right, I hope this, I expect that, right? It's just kind of images, like kind of a highlight reel of some things that, like a highlight reel, right? It's like the old idea of like a, I don't know if that's a modern term, but like highlights of a trip, right? Like still pictures of a trip, or something like that. Anyway, like a kind of series of images and thoughts about your meeting with a client that might come up. That's normal, right? And words and feelings. In a scenario, you are mimicking how life normally occurs to you within your consciousness field, which is like kind of three-dimensional, and it progresses in a smooth way through time, and so forth. You can kind of look around you to see what's going on, and so forth. So if you sort of walk through and think, all right, so I'll meet the client, and then what might be going on for them, what might they be thinking about, and then you might even imagine yourself as the client, immerse yourself in that a little bit. I plan to do a whole webinar, or I talk about how to properly more get in someone's head. That normally when people think about what someone else is thinking, they don't do it in a way that's really effective. But you might walk through a little scenario from their perspective, but then even just to illustrate the idea of a scenario, if you walk through and say, all right, well, what am I going to show them first? And then what might I have done instead? All right, there you're looking kind of alternatively and sideways. And then you might think, what do I say next? And then it might occur to you that you might want to plan out like what you say next might not be sayable unless you do something. So you might want to say, I took a look at your website and analyzed it for these things, and you can't say that if you haven't actually done that. So by starting to walk through this scenario, you realize you need to go do that. And then you think, well, what happens next? And you might add an element. Or you might ask, what if? What if they say, all right, well, I'll go back to my business partner and discuss it. Well, wait, maybe I should have invited their business partner or their spouse or whoever might object and just meet with them all at the same time if they're going to do that. And maybe not. I'm not, again, trying to give you necessarily advice on meeting with a client, but just giving you a sense of what a scenario might look like. All right. Thinking in scenarios like that is parallel, and this is the kind of profound, important thing I'm telling you here. It's the equivalent to taking action in the way that we normally use the phrase taking action. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's suppose somebody kind of muses about building an e-commerce business or ranking a website in general, but let's say they're thinking about selling yoga mats, all right? And then someone else actually goes and does it, right? Then there's a big difference there, right? And if the person who just thought about it is like, oh, I'm the same as you. I thought about doing a yoga mat business, but then the person who took action actually built the business might be think, well, we're not the same, or it didn't turn out the same, right? Because I actually took action and went and did it. That's not the same as just musing about it, and it's not just the same as having some thoughts about it, right? Even if the person who didn't take action about yoga mats had a bunch of thoughts about it, they felt how it would feel. They thought, oh, and then I would do this, and then I would do that, like, but not scenarios or anything, but just kind of like, thought about it in different ways. So the difference between just thinking about maybe you should do it, maybe I should do a yoga mat store and a business, and another person actually implements it and makes it work, that's a huge difference. Just as important is this thing in life that's more invisible. So clearly a person who takes action in the normal way is going to just be far more effective overall. Their life is going to snowball than a person who just thinks, oh, maybe I'll do that, or I should do this, and doesn't do it. There's a whole parallel thing going on in life that plenty of people take action in life. Plenty of people don't, but plenty of people do. But thinking in terms of scenarios, people do to some degree, just like everyone, no matter how lazy someone is, everyone takes action sometimes, right? You could talk about taking action to somebody who mostly are thinking doesn't take action much, and you can give them a little speech or a spiel about taking action. And they might, if they just wanted to, most people just want to validate their own self-image. Might be like, yeah, man, yeah, I take action all the time. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Taking action, that's where it's at. And you're thinking, well, I was trying to explain to them about taking action, but they don't really, but then they thought of a few times when they did take some action. Everyone takes some action, but people who take much more consistent, and sort of real or powerful action obviously do much better in life. Everyone thinks in scenarios a little bit, but the difference in your effectiveness will be massively different if you look at thinking in scenarios in your mind, like when you're planning, or sometimes people don't plan at all. They don't perform any activity they might call planning, but often when people do what they think of as planning, they don't really think in scenarios anyway. So when you're thinking about stuff, then it's as different as a person who just thinks about something versus taking action, like the yoga mat store example. It's just as different as those two people if you just sort of think thoughts, think how you feel about this, think about this, think about kind of planning, but just sort of like, oh yeah, that'll work, and yeah, then I'll do this. This is kind of like that step-by-step plan that that Rick asked about with that great question that I spent a webinar and some more of another webinar on. When people make what they call a step-by-step plan, they're really not thinking in scenarios. They're not really thinking and immersing themselves in what would really be going on in sort of a three-dimensional way. And I'll do this I'll work through examples of thinking in scenarios with you plenty, and I'll keep pointing out when I do it. So I'm not going to give yet another example of thinking through in scenarios right now, but I want to point out to you that doing that, thinking in that way, is a night and day difference in your effectiveness in life, your planning. But as we saw, you can't even play to win if you don't plan properly, can you? Like, playing to win isn't just a mindset. It's not just a decision that you make where you're like, yeah, I'm going to play to win now with this thing. That isn't playing to win. That's the same as a guy who thinks about, or a girl, a woman who thinks about making a yoga mat store but doesn't take any action. Just saying that you're planning but not working through in terms of scenarios, playing it forward, backward, looking around sideways, adding an element into the scenario. What if I do this? What if that person does this? Then how will that change things? What if we take this out? What if I ask them what their marketing budget is and they don't have an answer for me? Then what? What if? Add alchemy. You mix in something, you take out something, and see what would be different, and you play that forward. Then you add something in and play that forward. Or you add something in and look sideways for, what else? That's thinking in scenarios, and that's what I do a lot of when I say I work on preparing here. That for these alchemy, I do a lot of thinking in scenarios. It doesn't mean that I end up figuring out exactly the whole script of what to say and having an exact structure each time. But it does mean that I'm discovering good ideas that are what they are, right? What you're getting. Anyhow, anyway, I get as far as I get. But when you think in scenarios, it doesn't mean you figure everything out and that you get everything right and that you get every answer. But it's wildly more effective than, it's basically ineffective when you don't do it. You're really not planning. You're just feeling like maybe you are. Just like a guy who thinks about building a business but never takes action. So that may hit you pretty hard and be pretty profound, is that you're not taking action in parallel when it comes to thinking if you're not thinking in terms of scenarios. And so you want to start intentionally doing that as consistently as you as you will. But excellent. I'm glad I got a chance to express that, and I'll leave us with that for the monologue portion of this webinar, and then we can talk a little bit, and that'll be that. Wow, a lot of people on today. Let's see here. Maybe I'll start at the end and work my way back up a little bit. Just walked in late. Will there be a replay posted? Of course, always, Dave, always. Yes, I am, in fact, recording. Good, I didn't forget. Just checked. David, Chad writes, is thinking in scenarios a specific way of seeking understanding and building a foundation? It definitely is the effective way to seek understanding, or it's one critical ingredient in terms of seeking understanding, for sure. There's some other ingredients I want to give you. One of the things I'll talk about coming up, I don't know if I'll get to it on the next webinar or not, but I want to develop the idea that truth inherently involves the concept of matching, right? And I've also referred here and there to the idea of mismatching or disproving the opposite. If you can boil something down into it's either this or it's not this. And then, well, the one set of the, it's either raining or it's not raining. And if it's clearly not raining, then it must be raining. That's a kind of a lame example, but I did this with our consciousness field. We're either aware of something or we're not. It's ludicrous to say that we're aware of nothing, right? So we're aware of something, and that something we're going to call the consciousness field. So truth involves matching, and it involves mismatching the opposite. And that's the kind of thing that I'll develop And that's going to be an important, another example of an important ingredient about the method of knowing what's true. But scenarios are another very important ingredient. Dave Keyes writes, what is a good balance between taking action and not because you see bottlenecks in scenarios? Well, now that we have the scenarios idea as parallel to taking action in sort of real life, so to speak, I'm just like speaking kind of simplistically when I say taking action in real life. But, going out and, doing something, building something, making some clear change in the physical world, right? Registering a site, putting something on the site, calling a supplier, getting a contract, ordering some e-commerce goods and so forth, placing an advertisement, setting up a way to accept payments. That's all taking action in the conventional sense. If you spot a bottleneck, if you're thinking, at least think in scenarios. And then you're taking action in the parallel sense, in your mind, planning, whatever. As long as you're doing one of those things, when you're thinking through scenarios, you're going to translate that to taking action in terms of the normal way of changing the physical world. Because you're going to find something you want, you're going to have clarity regarding it, and you're certainly going to take action. But if you're neither working through scenarios nor making change in the physical world, that's where you're basically doing nothing. When people say don't stop thinking, keep linking, then that's correct in the sense of normally thinking just means listening to our brain talk to us, feelings, which comes from an idea. Another thing I want to develop with you guys in the future, in the near future, is I want to contrast seeking understanding properly and thinking in terms of scenarios with normally the way the mind works is by default it twists the idea of understanding into an idea of fitting, and it tries to fit new concepts, new or potential actions into its existing categories, into its existing box, and so forth. People will feel like they understand. They'll say, oh yeah, that fits. And now, interestingly enough, the blurrier a concept is, the easier it is to make it fit, right? Like if you're playing cards and you have a joker, right, a wild card, then it's easier to make a pair, right, or to make a full house, right? The blurrier something is, the easier it is to make things fit. So your mind twists understanding, and I'm giving you just a preview of something that I plan to talk about later, but your mind twists the idea of understanding. It's like a twist the idea of good. Understanding inherently is something that has a different meaning in terms of the world, the realm of consciousness field versus the realm of reasons where your mind is. It twists the idea of understanding into something that fits into its existing model of the world. And therefore it likes blurriness because it's easier to fit stuff. And then it'll give you a feeling like you understand if something fits. Instead, we want to go for clarity and have understanding be based on, not on something feeling like it fits. And I say all that because normally when I talked about when people say stop thinking, keep linking, often when it comes to thinking, people are just feeling whether something fits, feeling whether it fits into something we feel like doing already, or we're just worrying, right? We're just hearing our brain is like, oh, what if this, what if that? So just fretting and anything that doesn't have to do with scenarios, that's an ineffective form of thinking. And so that's why people say stop thinking, take action, and so forth. Pretty much anything's better than sitting around doing the wrong type of thinking. So either think in scenarios or make change in the physical world, and the whole way you're seeking to understand better whatever you're doing. Bottlenecks pop up all the time, right? And bottlenecks are a great way. Thinking in terms of bottlenecks is excellent. You want to think in terms of bottlenecks. You want to use thinking in scenarios and taking action and getting understanding that way to break bottlenecks, right? And you want to stack breaking of bottlenecks. That's what breakthrough stacking is and means, and what I have a whole series about. But I'll be doing kind of the alchemy, the new version of talking about that over time, I believe, too. Neil Gregory, I do a lot of thinking in scenarios, but not about business. and most of the what-ifs are negatives. Now, it's okay if the what-if, anyway, just don't get stuck. Remember, if it's a scenario, be careful. Don't confuse a movie that gets stuck or like an image. Don't confuse thinking in pictures with people say, oh, I think in pictures. Or I'm more intuitive, or should I listen to my intuition, or whatever. Things that are like static, like or things that are like image and then thought and then image and here's another thought and then here's another thought and here's a feeling. That's not a scenario. A scenario is, when I say scenario, another thing that gives you a hint about scenarios is think using alchemy, and by that I don't mean this course exactly. I mean the core concept of alchemy, or the illustration that is alchemy that I talked about in like the first or second webinar, where I talked about the idea of you add an element. You start with something that's quite clear, a scenario that's kind of simple. Like, okay, I'm sitting down, the client is sitting down, and we're talking. That's a very simple starting point. And then you start to add elements, okay, or a question. Well, what do they want? And then you have an answer to that. You might think, well, what do they want? And then you have a potential answer, and then you can explore that answer, or explore, well, to think what they want, I need to look at the scenario from their perspective. So now, and then you might go back in the scenario and think, well, what were they doing earlier in the day, just to kind of immerse yourself in what they might be thinking. And so now, see how it's coherent, and you add an element, and you move, you progress in time, or you go sideways, and you skip, you say, all right, I'm going to identify with this person now, this perspective. But it's kind of like a one change at a time, forward, backward, sideways, adding an element, removing an element. That's how you want to think. Alchemy, mixing, zooming in, looking at the elements, maybe breaking them apart, like taking one out. When I say breaking it apart, it's not like smash and chaos. It's like you remove one element, or you zoom in on one, examine it, notice a distinction, explore there. Okay, but it's kind of like, people say like, well, one step at a time. This is more like one ingredient at a time. So hopefully my response there kind of gave you some more to think about. Let me continue here though and take a look. When you are thinking in, just continuing Neil's question, when you're thinking in scenarios, do you plan what you're going to think, or do you allow your thoughts to wander according? So I start with a clear, simple scenario. Like when I talk about government, when I talk about imagine you're on an island and there's 10 people. You see, that's clear and simple. I'm not going to let that take me on a tangent about government right now. But I'm just saying, for example, if you do that, okay, I'm on an island, there's 10 people, it becomes easier to picture to do that. So I start with something that's fairly simple and clear, and then I'll try to add elements into it. If I'm tempted to have a more complex scenario, I'll still try to think about a very simple scenario and then add in elements to get to the more complicated, or more, the thing that has more parts to it. I'll add them one by one a little bit to be better. If I want to imagine 10,000 people in a city, I don't mean that I add each of those 10,000 people one by one, right? But I might start out with 10 people on an island, and then I might imagine things and still play it out until I can get to a city of 10,000 people. Of course, I don't mean that I add each of those 10,000 people in one by one, but yeah, I think you can get a sense of what I might mean. But you, your thoughts, you can, in terms of your thoughts wandering, there's a general thing that iterates in life regarding finding a foothold or in a framework, and then building on the framework. So sometimes it's okay to have a question and sleep on it, muse a little bit, let your mind wander at times. And that can be to like think of, because you also, when you let your mind wander, actually your mind as a mechanism, and the subconscious mind is working on stuff and will have thoughts that it wants to bring to your attention. And if you never listen to it in the right way, then you won't hear that or see those images and hear those thoughts. So it's fine to listen to your mind in a sense, to get some stimulation, but then you want to test those ideas. You want to use those ideas as like a springboard, and then when you're thinking intentionally, you mix it with thinking in scenarios. So yes, you can listen to your mind just like talking to other people, right? You might talk ideas over or introduce ideas or questions to other people and hear what they have to say. While they're talking, you listen, and while you're listening, you aren't like telling them to shut up and wait, make it in a scenario, or I won't listen to you, right? You just hear them out. So similarly with your mind, you can just hear out your mind and let it talk to you. But then you need to work through those different thoughts that it gives you in terms of scenarios to develop them and test them and distinguish and so forth. That's terrific. Neil, right, if I imagine the island with 10 people, the other 9 would end up being damn socialists. That's very funny. I like that. Okay. I don't know the characters in Fiddler on the Roof, Dave wrote. Sometimes I feel like Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof. On the other hand. I see. When you're thinking about stuff and your mind just kind of keeps giving you thoughts. One of the things you can do that can help focus your mind a bit is give it an external focus, meaning just have a notebook and a pen. And for some people, it can help to have even index cards, because some ideas it's hard to organize just with writing on a piece of paper. Sometimes if you write on index cards, then you can rearrange them and pile them and manipulate them in a way that works for you. Other people might want a whole whiteboard. Other people might work well within a program on a computer with a mind map. You can get a feel for your preference and for what's effective for you. But an external focus can help with your with directing your thoughts. Also, I try not to have too many open loops. I try to close loops, meaning I try to have too many open questions and issues at a time. But the external focus thing might help you with that. And also, once you start in a scenario, and you start to add elements into it or subtract elements and basically manipulate within a scenario, you'll find that will draw your focus in, just like a good piece of artwork or a good movie or a book will tend to draw your focus in, where you might start reading a novel or any kind of book, and you might have a hard time focusing at first because you have other thoughts and things you're thinking about. But then if it's, it might draw you in. And so another thing you can do, you can imagine yourself doing this with the book. Suppose a person didn't realize that if they just kind of kept reading, they would get drawn into the book, and they just gave up reading because their mind was scattered. That you can do the same thing with thinking in scenarios. You can think, oh, my mind's scattered, I can't think in scenarios. But as you start to add things and work on the scenario, it'll draw your focus in. Just like if you realize, hey, my mind might be scattered, but if I just keep reading, then I might miss what I'm reading for a few paragraphs or a few pages, but I'll kind of get drawn in, and it'll all start to make sense. And often people really don't realize that they can just keep reading and get drawn in. Or a movie, you might think, oh, this isn't sucking me in. Or a romantic situation where you have a date. You might not feel like going on the date right then because you have a bunch of other things in your mind. But if you kind of get into the date and just start it, right? Same thing with a task. You might feel like you're scattered, or you might not want to do a task, and you start doing it, and your focus does get drawn in. That's the adaptability thing, the flexibility, realizing that your mind itself will change. Dave wrote, my new habit over the last 6 months is to have a notebook on hand at almost all times, thanks to you. And do you find that effective? Has that been helping you, Dave? I know I'm kind of asking a leading question, but still I can ask. Absolutely. Excellent. All right. At least one of my pieces of advice is proven to work by at least one person. I'm great at thinking in scenarios. My problem is they're often negative ones picked up from negative people around. Any hints to avoid this tendency? Negative is I'm going to give you something important and helpful here, and it's going to help you not misinterpret what I'm saying also. Negative, when it comes to scenarios, can only involve getting stuck. No scenario in which you're not stuck is negative. Spotting a potential issue or bottleneck is not negative. Acknowledging reality is not negative. And what you want to do is ask positive questions. So you acknowledge reality and ask positive questions. Acknowledging reality, such as a potential bottleneck that could come up, is not negative, but then you ask a positive question that'll take you through it. So if you think that you're thinking in scenarios and they're negative, it's because you're thinking until you get, like, things get stuck and you're not getting all the way through the being stuck. Or you are getting through being stuck and you're just letting other people characterize you as being negative when you're not. People that think correctly, which includes acknowledging reality, they appear to be negative to people that that don't realize how to think correctly. So if you're getting stuck, that really is thinking negatively. But if you're just acknowledging issues, now you don't want to have a bias. Like someone could say, oh, look, I'm just acknowledging reality when I'm listing 10 problems about a person or 10 things they've done wrong. Well, make sure that you're testing the opposite too. One of the ways that I'll make sure to cover this in the future, is I'm going to develop thinking further with you guys and how I do things and how I test and how I work on knowing what's true better and get clarity. But you should always be testing the opposite consistently. So if you're saying, oh, I'm just acknowledging reality, and you have like 10 negative things in a row to say about somebody, then you want to stop and think, well, what about the opposite? What if I ask positive things? And that's different than being positive. That's instead just testing the opposite. Often people will come to a conclusion that will seem true when they're only trying to confirm it. But you can think of lots of confirmations that make something true. Like, I'm a competent person who always wins, and you can think of 10 times when you've won. But if you stop and you realize and have a habit of saying, wait a second, do I lose sometimes? You're like, oh, okay, there's sometimes I lose. And then you realize, you don't even have to conclude sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. Then you can try to think, all right, let me try to look at this objectively. How often have I won? How often have I lost in the last 10 year? That might be an irrelevant question. Then when you ask that, you might think, well, where am I going with that? And that doesn't do much for me. But there might be a different type of question about someone, and you're thinking about whether to work with them. And then you might think, well, what's a better question? Well, a better question is there a quality or a skill they have that that can really be helpful? And if there is, then maybe all the negative things actually just don't matter. Can I compensate for those things or just ignore them? Do I want that benefit from the person? And there's also a benefit of following through with people. If you just go through people very quickly and drop people too fast, then that has drawbacks, right? People will see you doing that. You yourself, it's a lot of benefits you can't even find unless you follow through with things. So I'm looking to find the right mountain, but one of the ways you find out if something's the right mountain is you need to climb the one that you're on and get a sense of it. Thanks, that helps. I'm thinking about other scenarios, the people around. Obviously, I need to change my environment. That's a high priority. Excellent. One thing about changing your environment is, let me give you this hint. This is a pretty great and useful thought for people. The way to let go of a cluster, and what I mean by a cluster is a person that you might want to let go of, genuinely, is still a cluster of things they do for you, right? Thoughts, actions, and so forth, right? So a person themselves is like a cluster in your life. Someone that you're dating, maybe you really would be better off getting rid of them. Or living with your parents is like a cluster. Your parents themselves are like a cluster. An environment is a cluster. A job, in the meeting that I'm talking about, is a cluster where there's a bunch of different elements to it, right? Good, bad, indifferent, so forth. What makes, in order to get rid of a cluster that has bad stuff about it, there's a reason why it's not like super easy. If it's just super easy, it's a no-brainer, then it's a no-brainer. But in a lot of cases, the reason why you're thinking about it is because it's not a no-brainer. Like moving out of your parents' house or dropping a relationship with someone where you're not sure if you should drop them. What you need to do, or a job that you're thinking you might want to get out of, what you need to do is take a look at the cluster, realize there's good and bad and indifferent stuff in there, understand the elements of the cluster, understand what the good is that you want to keep, and find a way to replace that good or you might be able to find a way to remove enough of the bad that you keep the person, or you keep the job, or the thing, or you keep living with your parents for a while, and then you just get rid of some of the bad stuff. So, but you need to zoom in, understand it as a cluster. Often people don't realize that, and the mind likes to treat things as whole objects, as if it's one thing, and it's very common for a mind to do this, and not think of it as a cluster. You think of it as a cluster. Again, we're looking at alchemy, the idea, the illustration of alchemy here, right? So you want to ask yourself, what is the good that I'm getting from dealing with this person that I want, or living with my parents, or keeping this job, or this general environment, this social circle? What's the good? And then either you find a way to substitute for the good that you need. Some of it might be good that you don't really need that much, but something you might need, or you might not, and you realize you don't need any of it. But you can't figure out whether you don't need any of it unless you have more distinctions and clarity about what the good is. And then maybe it isn't really good. It's just something that helps further goals that you don't even need, like validating yourself, right? But at other times, it really does fulfill things that you do need. And again, the more clarity you get about yourself, your core, your self-image, what you really need, what you don't, the clusters that we're talking about, all of that, clarity and understanding is what's going to enable you to do that. So great. So everything I just said there about that cluster thing, and figuring out what you do need and what is good, and finding a way to substitute that or keep that in a more constructive way. Or to, again, practically speaking, sometimes you can compensate or deal with the bad, so it's not a big deal, and then it's worth keeping the person. So that in and of itself is a very important idea. So great question, Josh. Is making a list of pros or cons? Ultimately, whenever you're thinking, you want to get down to scenarios and think of it in terms of scenarios, but you can use the list of pros and cons to stimulate yourself, like listening to your brain, but then explore each of the pros and cons in terms of scenario, like how does it relate to me, how is it helping me, what will it stack, what will it get me in the future. If you're thinking about if you're living with your parents, and you're, just because it's easy to picture, I realize most of us aren't, but then you can list pros and cons, but again, use those. You're not done. You haven't taken action until you think through the scenarios. So if a pro is that you don't have to pay for rent, then you can think about. Then you think, all right, well, how much rent how much would it cost to live on my own? And you'd have to think about. You might, as you think through the scenario of living on your own, you might realize you just need to Google and make some phone calls and find out how much some apartments are. Then you can think through how much do I really need to have an apartment, right? When I moved out of my parents' house, I moved out. I stayed with them the summer after college, after I graduated. So I was like 22, and then I moved out after that. And I lived in a very cheap efficiency apartment, right, near the University of Virginia. That was like $250 a month back in 95 or 6. And, I got to the minimum, that I could do. Oh, at first, actually, it was a $250 because I shared it with a roommate. And so I lived with a roommate. That was still way better than living with my parents. They're wonderful, loving people, but there's just a way that parents look at a child that really kind of keeps them limited, right? And there's like judgments and stuff that they don't even mean to make. But anyway, you can think through and then play it out in your mind, and then you'll naturally take action. Right, and you can see how naturally, as you think through the rent part and you imagine that, you'll find yourself dialing the phone and finding out what the rent is and looking into different places. Then you're taking action in the physical world, right? Scenarios lead to that. It's just this non-scenario thinking that leads to being paralyzed and not taking action in the physical world. Any type of thinking and planning that doesn't involve scenarios, which again I'll further develop over these webinars. I'll give you further examples of thinking in scenarios, a lot of them, because that's how I think when I'm planning. I don't mean I do it every second. Just like you don't take action in the physical world every second. Even if you're a real motivated person, you rest sometimes. You do recreation, which you can move your body, but you wouldn't call it taking action, right? So it's not like I'm always thinking in scenarios at all times. I relax other times, and sometimes listen to my mind, but I do a lot of it. And the more you do it, I think, just like taking action in the physical world, it snowballs. It gets easier. It doesn't matter how difficult it is at first. Just do your best. And the same as taking action. It'll snowball on you. How do we know our definition of goodness aligns with God's definition? All right. So what we want to do in terms of understanding definitions is we don't define words in terms of words anymore. We're going to construct the definition of a word constructed from our consciousness field. Even when we're constructing a definition that involves the realm of reasons, in the physical world, we still can start with our consciousness field and go from there, and describe the world of reasons as a reason why we see a certain thing or feel a certain thing. Such as even like the physical world aspect or definition of a tree is as the reason why we experience a tree in our consciousness field. And we can expand from there. A tree can be more than that. It can be involved with the reasons why other stuff happens. Like if a tree falls in the forest, even if you don't experience it, it might be the reason why another tree falls and a divot gets dug in the ground that we then experience. But anyway, that's a little bit tangential. All these things I'll develop over the next several webinars. I'll keep developing this from different angles until I'm satisfied with it, and you guys are. The transition is a transition, right? There's a transitional time with us. But anyway, let me stick to what Jonathan's asking here. So our definition of goodness is kind of easy. We construct it from our consciousness field, and it's the experience of good, or badness is the experience of feeling bad that we don't want. The reasons, remember, goodness doesn't lie. It doesn't exist inside of objects or situations. When you talk about defining goodness, how does it align with God's definition? Then you're talking about actions and things like that you might take. Those often we don't even know whether a particular action will lead to goodness, and that's part of where your confusion is in terms of, well, how do we know that a particular action aligns with God's idea of goodness? God's idea of goodness, God's idea of what action would lead to goodness is just the accurate one. So it's the exact same thing to figure out whether an action would lead to goodness in your consciousness field and net goodness overall and net goodness for other people too. It's the exact same question to say, would this action actually lead to net goodness for everyone? It's asking that question is the same thing as asking, would God consider this action good? You might not be able to know for sure whether an action would, in fact, lead to net goodness. So in that way, you wouldn't know whether it's God's it's accurate. However, what we can do is know a whole bunch of things. So we can know that violating, like the obvious one is property rights. We can know that an action based on blurry thinking is not going to be as reliably good as an action based on clear thinking. We can know that increasing our understanding of what leads to good is always going to lead to more good. We can know that, right, so things like that. So that at least sheds further light on what you're asking and allowed me to kind of give some more talking and angles on this. Again, none of this we have to necessarily reach closure, and we don't want to reach premature closure. The feeling of understanding this is going to come from a feeling of it fits. That's one of our issues in alchemy, is that I'm kind of giving you the opposite sometimes, is I'm giving you things that necessarily don't fit within the starter kit default understanding of the world, idea of the world, model of the world. So it literally doesn't fit the things I'm telling you. It breaks, but in a way that's necessary. The difference between what I'm saying and utilitarianism is that utilitarianism still is in the default view of the world. It's still, if you listen to a utilitarian talk, they'll mainly be referring to objects and actions and events as being where good lies. And I'm talking about good lying in consciousness fields where it belongs. And as long as, then once we understood good as existing in consciousness fields and bad as existing in consciousness fields, and also if we understand that bad results from contradictions specifically, good results from the mixing, of objects with the particular way that a particular mind is set to receive it, which is on one hand arbitrary but also objective once you define which mind you're talking about. So good comes from mixing with receptors. In that way, it's objective. If you take a particular mind at a particular time, then what music will feel good to it is actually objective. Right? Once you specify this mind right now, then the mind has certain receptors, so to speak. Right? Or the equivalent of receptors, the logical equivalent of receptors. Same thing with what you eat, with what that mind or the body attached to the mind would eat. What'll taste good is objectively true based on that if we specify that mind at that time. So goodness comes from mixing of receptors with objects, events, and so forth. Badness comes from contradictions. There's a way that you can define or understand utilitarianism so that it overlaps with what I talk about, but I'm giving the correct concept. Once we understand good in terms of consciousness fields, bad in terms of consciousness fields, plus good in terms of mixing, the reasons involving mixing with receptors, bad involving contradictions, and then net good and so forth, then yeah, we want net good, and so forth. Anyway, that's good there. Sorry. All right, my mind's enough of at its limit without sounding like a sphinx over here. I do enough of that to us without doubling down on the craziness. Mike, the simple approach you are using is designed to get us going in the right direction, and the quality of things like goodness will fill itself in as we understand more. Is this correct? I'm not sure. I might have blown all the gaskets. I might have used all the batteries that I have in my mind at this point. Let me see if there's any questions that immediately bring something to mind for me, as opposed to just cause a little bit of what you ever see Beavis and Butthead, where one of them has like a light bulb that just like goes bzz, bzz, and then fizzles out. Their version of having an idea. So any questions that do that to me right now, I'll have to get to later. Thank you, David. Thinking in scenarios is very helpful to me. Just one of the many nuggets tonight. Still processing. Right, absolutely. Excellent. New note on my computer. Excellent. Exactly. And listen, before we get answer, okay, let me say this. This will be kind of tangible. When I was teaching Magic strategy, in Magic, right? I don't know if you guys can picture Magic, the card game. You can look up David Mills' Magic Finals and probably find a video of me playing it back when I was much younger. But you can get to, or you can think in terms of chess. Chess might be easier for people to picture. If you have like a bunch of pawns that turn into queens and you have like 10 of them, and the guy has like one king left and you've taken all the rest of his stuff. I don't even know if that's possible to, how many, whatever. Let's say you have 3 queens and they have a king. Then that's like a hard lock, right? You're just going to be able to checkmate them no matter what. And there's no way they can stop you, essentially, as far as I know, unless there's a way for them to stalemate somehow where you can't move. That might be a stalemate. If we stipulate that that's not the question that you're automatically going to win, then that's like a full hard lock. Then there's something like a soft lock where you've gotten to a point where there's pretty much no way that you can win. Like if you take your opponent's queen in chess and you and your opponent have at all equal, skill to any degree, and you're not immediately in a terrible position like with the next couple moves or whatever, then that's sort of like a soft lock. Or if you're up by like a queen and a bishop, or a queen and a knight, like a queen and one other thing, if you're up by that, then you're at a point where it's not a full hard lock, but it's pretty darn impossible to lose. That's like a soft lock. And then what was really helpful in actual practice in real life with people was introducing, neither a soft lock nor a hard lock are particularly helpful in practice to have a grasp of, because everyone else has the same grasp of it. So it doesn't really give you much of an advantage. We all understand that we'd rather be a queen and a rook over our opponent in chess, right? That doesn't, just knowing that or having that pointed out to us isn't going to help us much. But what in practice is very helpful to people is this idea that I coined the term a semi-soft lock. And what I showed people how to do is to identify in Magic, and I'll try to give it a sense in chess. Maybe being chess, you're up in a certain way, where it's the tiniest of advantages in one sense, like perception-wise, or it's really easy to get to. Like if you really focus, or if you in Magic, if you understand what I'm saying, if you build your deck to really be very focused on getting to an advantage, but that's pretty easy to achieve. But that if you achieve it, you're so set. And by the way, our OMG is built this way with like search engine optimization. There's a certain search engine optimization is something that if you really focus on, you can achieve it. You can be good enough at it that you can get results with it. At least in this day and age, right? In this world, the way it is now, and for the foreseeable future. So it's set. The reason it's so effective is it's built like a semi-soft lock, where it's very achievable if you focus on it. And once you achieve it, if you just behave competently at that point, then you're going to monetize it in some way over time, if you keep working at it. So if you focus, you can get to it, and then if you behave competently at that point, you'll win, which doesn't necessarily mean beating someone else. In Magic, it does, but you know what I mean. So this idea of the semi-soft lock, something that you can really go all in on to focus, but it's so doable ultimately. And I would do this, and this is how I would win constantly in Magic. You couldn't, not in every case, but you know, much more than most people would, and so at that point you get to the top of the world. You find that most achievable thing, but that's also going to give you an advantage. The characteristic of it is if you're just competent at that point, like reasonably competent, not like hyper competent, just reasonably competent. Once you achieve it, then you're just going to achieve your objective. So like what's the smallest threshold that you have to get over? Where once you get over that, you just have to kind of, you can kind of stay in the box after that, but not like just, you know, commit suicide or whatever. But if you you don't really hardly have to get out of the box after that. Then you're gonna get your objective. That's a semi-soft lock. And then the question is to know to look for that. Once you realize that's the question to ask regarding whatever in life, and even this can apply to relationships and romantic relationships. So like what's that thing that I can get to, that if I really focus I can certainly get to it, and then if I'm just competent after that I can get my objective. That thing iterates in life, where if you look at life that way, it's extraordinarily effective. Semi-soft lock. So I realized something in life a while ago, and that if you just ask the right question, like basically I realized that, this will sound trite, but it was weirdly profound the way I realized, and very effective. Problems have solutions. People really spend, and this is so much like the play to win idea of people limit themselves so much by wondering whether a problem might have a solution. And if you just discard wondering whether problems have solutions, and you just think that problems do have solutions, then it's just a matter of asking the right question. So what I realized is that asking the right question is a semi-soft lock. And if you look around you just this week, if you watch your own mind perhaps, and then if you watch others, what other people are doing in life is they're going for the soft lock or the hard lock. Meaning basically they want a source for an answer, which is like a soft lock, or they want the answer, which is like a hard lock. But they're only satisfied with one of those two things: a source for an answer or the answer. That's the soft lock and the hard lock. That's what everyone realized they wanted in Magic too. But that's mediocre. Then they win some, they lose some. When you realize to go for the semi-soft lock, that thing where you're inevitably going to win once you achieve it, and so you go all in on it, and it's the kind of thing that if you go all in on, you're going to get. So I go all in on asking the right question. And at first you ask a question that will lead to a better question, that will lead to a more specific question. So at first, regarding the social circle cluster that we were talking about, that Josh brought up, right, and potentially changing his environment. The first question is, well, what is it about the environment that, or the first question might have been, should I listen to Dave? And then he answered that properly and did, and then we talk about the cluster. But to be serious, the first question is well, what's the cluster here that I can understand so I can identify the good that I want to keep? It's what people will do, back to the cluster idea, they'll throw out the cluster and then they'll find themselves getting back to it, right? Same thing with drugs. People try to get off drugs, but there'll be something they want in the drug. If they can identify that and find a different way to get it without the drug, that's when you can get off drugs. But it's when you throw out the whole cluster, which people do all the time, right? Or they break up with one person, but then there's something they want or need out of what that person was giving them, then they just get another person who just ends up equally bad because they need that need still. All right, anyway, I'm talking about asking the right question. First you ask the question about, well, what's the good and the bad in the cluster? And then that'll lead to more specific questions, right, about where you're poking around. And so you ask a question, you ask a more specific question, you poke around, you ask a poking around question, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Some lead you down a dead end, but that's okay. Then you go back to the node, you know, like in a maze, you go back to where there's other options, ask another type of question, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But the semi-soft lock in life is asking the right question. And when you realize that if you ask the right question, the answer will come. And problems have solutions. And again, you can watch other people where they feel like they're not satisfied unless they have the source for an answer or the answer itself. And instead, if you feel like fight the whole battle on asking the right question, and the rest will follow. And so what people will do is they're so concerned with skipping over to the soft lock or the hard lock, they don't devote the proper focus and resources to the semi-soft lock. So they never get the semi-soft lock. They don't get to the soft lock or the hard lock. So they get nothing because they didn't focus the resources properly. They tried to skip, and they tried to get to something that's too hard, and they couldn't get to it, which is like the source for the answer or the answer, but they don't have the question yet. So go all in on the question. And this isn't like some theory I have. I just operate this way, and it's extraordinarily effective. Where was I talking about on that? Not sure what question I was on, but it's all good. I'm glad I covered that. Sheila asks, could you walk us through thinking through a scenario, maybe something you've done recently, or perhaps my situation of playing cards with the boys? How would you work through a scenario where playing cards with the boys could be a win-win and fun for all? Okay, cool. That's a good question. 37 minutes ago. Well, I'm behind. Okay, well, let me drink for a second and relax for a moment, and then I'll do that. Let me point out that as you start to think through scenarios and you start to then involve other people and their minds and so forth, you're going to end up a little bit down the rabbit hole sometimes, and you don't need to. You can just sort of, I say stipulate. You could say, all right, I'm just going to go with a kind of simplistic view here of people's minds or whatever, and which is okay. But I'm also pointing out that the more we understand recurring concepts like other people's minds and goals and their desires and stuff, which comes up all the time because we're dealing with people all the time, then the more those are kind of filled in clearly for us as building blocks, and then we have those at our fingertips, and so we can come up with correct things better the more we have those major building blocks fill in. And we're always working on filling those in. Obviously, I'm not beating about in the bush with that stuff to the best of my ability. I'm dealing with that stuff directly, but it'll develop over time too. All right, so I might imagine, so I might think, okay, so I'd like a situation where at the end of us playing cards, then my 9-year-old, or it might not be your own child, but the 9-year-old 9-year-old is happy and the 18-year-old is happy. Normally, you wouldn't call them an 18-year-old and a 9-year-old. You call them by their names, right? But I don't have them. I don't want to give them fake names either. So I'll just do it this way. And then you might think, okay, so I imagine us being happy. Maybe the bottleneck that I might think of first is the 9-year-old being happy, because it's probably might be harder for them to be happy than the 18-year-old. That might not be the case, but it just might be. So then you might think, well, what might make them happy? And now you might even shift a little bit into imagining being them, and even imagine you're them and you're saying, oh, I had a good time, I'm happy, right? And that's a scenario. That you're picturing something that you would experience that takes place in the consciousness field. Of course, there's a reason for it in the external world, but you picture it as a conscious field thing, right? As a real, like a movie. The 9-year-old saying, "Oh, that was fun. Thank you. I enjoyed that." And then you might think, well, what happened right before that? And maybe they won some hands, they lost some hands, but they felt like they were in the running and it was close, and they were complimented here and there. Something was pointed out to them on how they could do something better. Or you might imagine, wait a second, maybe is there a way to point out something? You might think, okay, well, what's a scenario where I might point out something where that can help them grow in terms of playing cards? And you might think of something, you might not. But that's a question, right? And then you might think, oh, well, let's suppose there's an opportunity to point something out. What might I say? And then you might think of things that might be more effective. Because then in the moment when it pops up, you might not have the mental space and the time to figure it out. But maybe if you see it coming, you figure it out. All of this, by the way, that I'm describing takes a while, but you could think it through in a few seconds or a minute or two, or 5 or 10, depends, right? But you can think through scenarios pretty quickly, sometimes within seconds, especially as you have more of a habit of it. Not necessarily every potentiality within seconds, but you can kind of play through and see some major bottlenecks within seconds. And one of the things you could see is that there could be different rules, or you could play a few. You could play a few. Sometimes in a card game, you can finish a particular set of hands that leads to a certain point threshold. Like, let's say you played, I don't know, 50 points or 100 points, which means nothing. I haven't defined the game, but I'm just giving that helps to still picture it. You played at 50 points. Instead of playing to like 200 points, you played at 50 points 4 times, and that might allow each person to win. And at some point, you and the 18-year-old might recognize that it might be nice to kind of basically let the 9-year-old win, at least one of them. Or not, just depending on their things. So maybe everyone you try to engineer it so everyone gets a chance to win a little bit. And you might even do different games, some games that play more to the strengths of one person versus the other person, or where they might be more likely to win. When I was young, I legitimately, and I even asked my parents later, sometimes parents will throw a game or something, but I was good at Boggle, where I legitimately could defeat my parents in Boggle, right? Even when I was fairly young, not like when I was 5, but when I was 9 or 10. But in other games, maybe they would win, right? So maybe there's a few different games, and you play a few different ones, and there's one that a 9-year-old might reliably win. And maybe in that session, there might not be something, but maybe you encounter those people more than once. And if that's the case, then you can poke around with some games. You could try some games. And then maybe the very nature of trying games might be fun for one or both of those kids. And it might make them less invested in whether they win or not if you're trying something new. And you might discover something. And what I'm doing now is working through scenarios. Now, when I talk about working through a scenario, that's a little bit different than working through a scenario in the sense that I'm talking to you and what comes to your mind, and my description of what's in my mind is not what I'm imagining itself, but it's close enough that this should give you a decent indication. So you see how I add an element, I think of something, I add that in, I don't really leap, right? Everything was sort of like I add one thing or I change one aspect of the situation. So that's kind of an example of working through the scenarios, and you can keep doing that, and you can add elements. You might think of something that I didn't think of there, but that would be like an element, like alchemy, like you added in. You're like, oh wait, we could have done this. David didn't think of that. Great, and then you develop that out and play that out, and then you might think of something else, or it might be a full solution. But as you're doing the scenarios, remember the semi-soft lock is asking the right question. And so that you might realize, you might come to the point where you say, oh, the right question is, what group of games can I have on hand where there's going to be a fun outcome for everyone, like a satisfying outcome for everyone? And then you might not know the answer to that question, but just getting the question again, that's the semi-soft lock. And then you'll inevitably get there. Or the question just might be, what's fun that can involve a 9-year-old and an 18-year-old and me? And I don't know yet. But now that's a question, and then that might lead to some other questions. And that might not lead to answers immediately, but problems have solutions, and if you ask the right question, you'll get there. So Gary writes, so thinking in scenarios is strategic planning. Yes, it's strategic planning done properly, involves scenarios. Now, you can write things down as you're doing it. You can do some math, you can write down some notes, and so forth. But the writing should be grounded. Just like I said, you should construct the definition of words based in scenarios in your consciousness field and so forth. But basically, scenarios is where you construct the definition of words from scenarios. And I'll give you more examples of that in the future. Similarly, when you're writing stuff down regarding planning, let's say you make a business model and you say if we make 100 sales, then if we charge this much, it would be that much, and we might. And what would it take to fulfill it? And here's a question, I write that down. It's based in scenarios, right? Like the writing is notes and thoughts and math that you're doing that's an outgrowth of thinking in scenarios. And then you relate it back and you test the ideas and conclusions based back into scenarios. It's pretty funny, Michael. The clustering, yeah. All right. Great. Let's see if I can wrap my head around what Mahira is asking here. In terms of truth, I was reading a book about how the material world as we know it is made of a priori categories, and as such, finding truth is to discover these categories. And would this be the same thing as reason? Well, if someone's talking about truth properly, they need to distinguish the consciousness field or something that's exactly identical to it but named differently, and then the world of reasons. And I don't know that the world of reasons is made of categories. I've been thinking that the idea of categories, that word, that concept, is going to be important. It's going to be important regarding thinking, scenarios, words, and so forth. I'm still working on that myself in terms of understanding categories better. Maybe I discover some things I haven't. That would be terrific. If you can give me the name of the book, I might check it out if you want to give the book itself. So I could read it. So far, whenever I've read something that might be close, then they end up not being. And I don't think I have a bias. Like I don't think I want to be all unique. I think the reason but I might not be right. Maybe there is some. But I could tell you that it's certainly relaxing and not having to teach this because people already have it. Seems to feel great to me when I imagine doing that. So I don't know that I have too much of a bias. I don't imagine adoring crowds chanting my name or anything like that. The View of Life, Georg. Okay, I very well might check that out here. But anyway, whenever I read stuff, they just don't end up being close. And then I point out that I don't think something else is close, just so you have kind of an open space in your mind for what I'm talking about, so you don't project on top of it. So Bryce is asking about, he says, I'm an engineering student and I've been struggling to balance my academic studies with OMG. On a daily basis, I plan through scenarios in which I can do both. However, I feel that doing both activities within a short time frame makes things more blurry and can even backfire on me. Overall, my question is it better to just focus planning on one of the activities first, that my mind digests it, and then concentrate on OMG SEO? So grab elements from my academics and not let them blend with SEO? what I don't like to have is multiple open loops in my mind. It's not really a time management thing for me, and I'm not saying it is for you either, right? I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, and yeah, I might be just fully agreeing, and I'm not like correcting what you're saying either. I'm just sort of giving sort of a baseline for bridging here. Right, it's not really a time. It's not really a time in the day thing. It's more of an issue of open loops. And if you have a bunch of open loops in your mind, like if what you're studying is taking up your creative focus, then yeah. Now, one thing you can do is separate it by days. It might be that 4 or 5 days out of a week, you can fully do your academics properly and get the grades that you want, and then 2 days out of the week, you can work on OMG and SEO and that sort of thing. And so you might experiment that way. There's when we go to sleep, there's a certain way that resets our mind, our brain, and so forth. It's not like total or perfect though, so it may or may not work for you, just depending on the workload and yourself and various factors. But that might be something that you can test. And then if someone's doing academics that don't involve open loops, but they're more like, it's more like somehow you can just do work and study, but there's not like open problems that your mind is working on. It depends on your own personality and also on the topic that you're studying, the degree that you're getting and so forth, or even the different professors can differ. But it's more about open problems and open loops, and that's what will mostly interfere. Or of course, if just literally you run into it where there's not enough time in a day, then that could be another issue. It doesn't sound like the time of the day is the issue. It sounds more like the open loop thing would be the issue. So bottom line is experiment with trying it on different days. Maybe something as simple as the weekend you devote to OMG and the weekdays you devote to your studies, and that may or may not work just depending on the particulars of the situation and your own mind and such. And I don't mean mindset. I mean different people have just different abilities to learn foreign languages or to learn different subjects. It's for some people it just flat out takes more time than others. Right? I have a fairly easy time with some subjects, and other subjects it would take me a lot more time. And everyone is that way regarding different subjects. Jonathan asks, when you think of yourself inside these scenarios, and of course it's like a representation of myself, right? Or like an avatar or whatever. Is it just like you might do in terms of a video game, right? You're thinking of yourself, your avatar, your character in a video game. Is it important to do this in a first perspective point of view? Actually, what you want to do as a general rule of thumb, not just with this, but in general, is looking at things from different angles. So first perspective, first person, out of your own eyes, and then you can also mentally step back. Don't identify with your typical body and brain, and you can look from a different perspective or viewpoint. As a general rule of thumb, multiple angles. Multiple angles are just like when I talk about alchemy, like you change one thing at a time, you add an element, you subtract one. Looking at something from a different angle is the same type of thing I'm talking about, where you add an element or you subtract an element, like the alchemy idea. A different angle is equivalent to adding an element or subtracting an element. Sometimes when I think of myself taking action, it's me watching myself do that particular task. Outside looking in, would this limit the effectiveness? Oh, there's an NLP truth, which is like if you imagine yourself from a first-person perspective, like out of your own eyes, like on a roller coaster, like going up, 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 and then you're about to zoom down, and you imagine zooming down. That'll feel different than if you just imagine yourself watching imagine watching your body, but you're something else watching your body on a roller coaster. You'll feel different. If you want to feel, so how you're identified, and that is another thing I actually plan to, it's a concept I'm working on. I've been working on for years and I have insights into it, but I'm looking to get even more clarity for you guys on the benefits and drawbacks or just distinctions regarding identity and what you identify with at a particular moment and the benefits and drawbacks of that. Some things I know just offhand are if you identify with something, there's a certain way that you can get in flow and feel how it feels in a way that you can kind of steer in a way that you wouldn't realize to steer otherwise. But a drawback to identifying with something is you kind of take the configuration of that something for granted. So simplistically put, it's hard to like change your mind if you're identified with it. So if you want to change core beliefs or your mind, you want to disassociate from your mind. That's why it's so important to understand ultimately that you're not your mind, so you're able to fully look at a perspective where you're not your mind at all, so that you could change some of your deepest core beliefs and norms about how you should think and so forth. So that's kind of a preliminary, some quick thoughts on that, and then I'm going to look to develop different things that I mentioned there more in the future. Okay, in your process, can a scenario start with a question? Sure, yeah. But really, okay, let me look at what your example is. My question currently to myself is, how can I best improve? It's more like you start with a question, and then you start developing the answer with a scenario, and then the scenario can lead to more questions, it can lead to answers. So it's sort of like the process of thinking can start with a question for sure. And along the way, you can identify better questions. Like scenarios, one of the outputs, if you think of them like a machine that has outputs, makes widgets, scenarios make questions, and then questions make answers, but the answers also come out of scenarios. Like thinking properly involves scenarios, period. And so you get better and better questions, and then either you'll just immediately reach out and grab the answer, it'll just be obvious, or you'll be thinking through a scenario. Really, another way to look at it is when you ask a specific enough question, often the answer will just reveal itself like right away. But however you want to look at it, you start with a question, you use scenarios to pursue a question. That'll lead to more questions and better questions. It'll lead to answers, revelations, and then eventually it'll all just fit into place and you'll be taking action. That might lead to more questions than you think in terms of scenarios when you're thinking on purpose, like planning, and so forth. You can boil the planning and thinking and acting part of life down to taking action, like in the physical world, doing scenarios, and then listening to other people, to your own mind. My question currently to myself is, how best can I improve my WordPress website skills daily? What actions will move me forward most skillfully? So yeah, you want to, when you're doing the thinking part of dealing with this, then you want to do that through scenarios. So you can, let me see here. Would I start with that, then start fleshing out options for actions? Right. You'll when you think in terms of scenarios, you'll just find yourself literally getting up out of your chair, or you're walking around and you get in your chair and you start to type, like on you'll find that you can't even stop yourself from taking action when you think in terms of scenarios. And so you're no longer going to have the question of when do I stop thinking and fretting or whatever and start linking, or don't think, just act. You won't have to even worry about statements like that. Again, those statements are not incorrect. They're basically correct within the errors that people normally make. But you won't even have to worry about when you're going to take action. When you think in terms of scenarios, you'll just take action. And some of those actions will just be to get you the result you want. Others will be, well, like you'll think, okay, I need to Google this. And you go Google it, and that may or may not lead to the result you want. But you'll clearly be correct in that it made sense to Google that, right? Or you might go say, oh, I want to check out theme forest and find a theme. And maybe you won't find one that you like right away. Or maybe you'll get stuck with something else. But it certainly makes sense, and you'll feel like taking that action. And when I revisit this and notice I didn't take the actions I recommended and imagined, then how would you zoom in on blockages, etc.? Just try this week like applying this to like scenarios. What you're almost certainly doing, whenever you're blocked, mostly what the mind does, again, it flashes images and then it has association. The mind like thinks by association. It's like one thought, then another associated thought, another associated thought. That's not a scenario. Right? You want to, The other thing about thinking in terms of scenarios is that it actually forces conscious interaction, not just rubber stamping. Normally people rubber stamp their mind's thoughts one way or the other, and they don't realize they're rubber stamping it, but they are. When you're thinking in terms of scenarios, there's nothing to rubber stamp. You're automatically going to be consciously involved properly in what you're doing, and it'll really work. It's easy to mistake thinking in images, and like a sentence and a thought that's like a still picture or a relatively still picture, or like a thought like, oh, I should go to themeforest.com. Well, see, even then, like I'm starting to get specific. Once you're like, okay, I should sit down in my chair, I should go to themeforest.com, and then don't get stuck. Like if you just think I should go to themeforest.com and start going, or I should go to wordpress.com and make sure I'm registered, or I should update WordPress. That's just a statement. That's not a scenario. It might be the very beginning of one, but then you think, okay, so what does that mean? I sit in my chair, I type in mywebsite.com/wpadmin, hit enter, and then I put in my login information. Oh wait, I don't know where my login information is. Okay, I'll search in my Gmail for something, or I'll re-register, or I'll go to WordPress.com, or I'll try to ask someone, where do I find my login? Whatever the bottleneck might be. Or you log in and you're like, all right, there's a whole menu here. And then I heard of themeforest.com. Maybe I'll go there and poke around there and I'll download. And then at some point in doing that, you're just going to go do it. But you're developing, what do I do next? And it should look like not just a statement of what you should do, not just like kind of a picture or a movie that lasts a couple seconds and then stops. You're adding another element and you're subtracting an element and you're adding an element. And you keep doing that until you get clarity. No problem, Michael, no problem about being late. Michael Long wrote, this semi-soft lock idea was an overwhelming advantage for our member in those days, and they really got it. So it was actionable. Yeah, no, totally. I think when I said that, I think that made sense to people to a large degree, and I can point it out here and there in the future, but it's one of those nicely tangible, helpful things. Megan Lee wrote, the feeling that something fits. I often feel this when I listen to you, so that something seems now to be a signal that I don't yet get it. So that seems now, oh yeah. So that feeling like that something fits, right? That seems now to be a signal, right? When you feel like, oh, that fits, that makes sense. That's a signal I don't yet get it. Well, here's the thing. Imagine you're talking to someone and they say something and it sounds like a good idea. What do? You think about it, and what does that mean? Scenarios. So whatever I say, you need to work through it yourself in terms of a scenario. There's no such thing as understanding properly unless you work through the scenario yourself. And you don't know something to be true unless you can identify what the opposite of it would be and get a sense of how that can't be right. That's a little bit of a preview of things I'll get to. Making sense, Megan wrote, is not the same as what might be called revelation or the aha moment when some thought breaks through and opens a new space. Now, there might be times when I'll say something and the scenario will just be kind of vivid to you, and it'll make sense properly, where you'll really get how the opposite doesn't make any sense, and it'll happen in a flash. So it could be a real aha moment where you really did get a distinction, or you see a new distinction, or you cross off something where you see like, yeah, I see how it can't be right to do the opposite. It can't be right not to think in scenarios. It can't be right just to hear a thought and just not know what to do with it and just to have the next thought. It can't be right to think I should work on WordPress and just not know what to do with that thought, and just to kind of get stuck there. So it must be right to think in scenarios. When you see that's a genuine good thing, but still walk it through and you can really check things over with scenarios. The more just applying the scenario thing will, be just, if all I did in Alchemy was teach you about scenarios until it made sense. I guess in one angle, that is what I'm doing. But of course, you'll get a zillion other things. We'll go through building your offer and things like that. But it's unbelievably different. Your functional intelligence, your functional ability to think and use thinking as part of your goal achievement in a way that's effective will be really just dwarf other people's. You will be so smart in practice compared to whoever else. If you, to the extent that you think more and more in scenarios, you're just not going to have competition. I mean, someone would have to have such an advantage over you otherwise, and such a head start for them to compete with you in anything, the more you think in terms of scenarios. Not that we need to think in terms of competition or not, but while you're kind of, anyone that's still getting their stable base under them, there's some competition involved there sometimes, or at least a little worrying about it. But oh my goodness, the difference is astronomical the more you think in scenarios. And you'll just get it. The more you'll start to do it, you'll succeed to some degree, and you'll see the results like so clearly as you think in terms of scenarios. And with scenarios, you're never stuck when you're thinking in terms of scenarios. If there's a feeling of being stuck, or not a feeling, if the result is stuck, if the result's negative, if you're not actually taking action in real life, you're not thinking in scenarios. When you're in scenarios, how do you get stuck? You just add anything in there. Right? Or you change one thing, or you look at it from a different angle, or you go forward in time, or you go back in time. It's absurd to get stuck. It'd be like standing in the middle of a mall and saying you can't move when there's when it's not that crowded, right? A scenario is there's so many options to add and subtract, go forward in time, look around sideways, go back in time. What did I do? That it's impossible to get stuck. It's so impossible. It's utterly ridiculous to get stuck. Right? Again. You're standing in a mall, and you're like, I can't move for no reason. Someone's like, why can't you move? You're like, I just can't. Right? Of course not. So there you go. With scenarios, you're never going to get stuck. If you're not stuck, you're not frustrated, you're not bored, you're not angry, you're not feeling helpless, you're not, I think I said afraid. You don't need to lash out at someone, and so forth. So it's so transformative, and you'll be no matter how smart you are, you'll be functionally way smarter. It's just crazy. Like functionally, I mean, Mike experiences this, like when I do this, of course he experiences it for himself. He does it too. But when he watches me do it, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. So, and then it just becomes, there's just even thinking in terms of intelligence just becomes almost absurd, because people that think they're smart and then don't think in scenarios, you just run so fast. Like it's like they're standing still or walking and you're sprinting, or you're in a car. Or they're like a fast runner and you're in like a race car. It's just ridiculous. So there's just nothing in the sense of someone else being intelligent, not in a condescending way, but in a way that you don't need to be intimidated by other people. Never should we feel condescending, but also we don't want to feel intimidated. I found that thinking in scenarios each time I try it really does, and this Megan stuff, really does bring positive results that can be used to build. Absolutely, Megan, exactly right. And you'll just get stronger with it. It'll just it will snowball, especially applied to OMG activities. I'm trying to be more conscious to get my mind in line to do it intentionally. And remember, be careful. I'm never the word police. You can phrase things however you want. It's not about what words you use necessarily, but careful. It's more like you're using the fact that you're conscious in a better way, but you don't actually become more conscious. But totally reasonable to say words like more aware, more conscious. Sometimes we just have to talk practically, and it's a totally reasonable way to refer to this. So just in case it's helpful to say that, I say that. But it's never about using the right wording with me. It's not. That's a silly place to focus. It's a type of discipline, like taking my mind on a walk like a dog on a leash and not letting it romp around the neighborhood. And it'll stop being so much of a discipline the more the opposite becomes absurd. The more you get underneath the feeling of it's a discipline when you're struggling against. The more it feels normal to think in terms of scenarios, right? And at first you kind of borrow from my energy because I do it quite consistently. But then you get underneath it, and you'll see how it just doesn't make sense otherwise. And the more that's clear, then the easier it is to do, and then the more you get results and everything. Like taking my mind on a walk like a dog on a leash and not letting it romp around the neighborhood. Absolutely. That's great. Deborah said, that is my aha moment, asking the key question to come up with the answer. That's semi-soft lock, yeah. This is also the most powerful strength of a great coach, David Mills. And that you most definitely are. Thank you. You're very welcome, and thank you, Deborah, for saying that. That's terrific. Jen writes, can you go through an example of going all in on finding the right question? Let me just say this for now, and I might give that one some more thought too, to develop. But there's a way that people want like a source, like they have a question like, how do I improve, my WordPress skills, or how do I make money, or whatever, and they want to find someone or a product or whatever to like give them the whole, like the answer. Of course they want the answer, but people realize they don't necessarily need a hard lock in life, like a hard lock, like the final, but they want like a source. So like, if I find a source, then I'll get there. And so they devote their resources to finding a source. So someone wants to make money. They want to have their own business or some monetization on the side of their job, something they're doing for themselves, right, directly. And so they keep buying courses, let's say, and investing in those courses. So they're going all in on finding the source. If you're going all in on finding the source to give you an answer, you're not going all in on targeting and getting more specific with the question. So when you develop the scenarios in your mind, or you can buy a course on how to make money, but use the course to get the right questions. Or you can take action and try to succeed with something, but you're taking action not to get the answer, but to get the question better for yourself. And you might, while you're trying to get the question, you might just get the answer. While you're trying to achieve the semi-soft lock in a game, in chess, you might just win, right? If the win comes up, you take it. It's not going to be a problem. If you just find the answer, it's not like you'll, blow it off. So nothing about what I'm saying will cause you a problem if the answer, it won't take you longer. But yeah, you focus in on, you start with a question, and then you can take action, you can ask people, you can buy a course, which is like could be trying to find a source. But all of it, your focus is on finding the right question, getting that question more targeted, asking related questions, and so forth. So that hopefully helps you, and with the idea of going all in and finding the right question. That answer developed better than I knew that it would at first when I first started answering it, so that it developed pretty well. It's not exactly that we have the answers within us for any scenario. That's a reasonable approximation. Like people that believe that they have the answers within themselves if they just ask the right question, that's effective. Like it's better than not. But I actually don't think of it in terms of the answer is within me, because there's ultimately that. I mean, again, it's not about being the word police, but generally people don't exactly mean the right thing by that. It's more like that the answer, that problems have solutions. It's sort of like the world is rigged. Or here's this: if you're playing a video game. And again, suppose it's the type of video game where you're playing a character and you're going through like levels or places, and you're achieving an objective at the end, right? You're rescuing the girl, you're saving the world, or whatever. When you play that video game, you are presuming that it's rigged so that if you keep playing, you'll win. That's how you want to go through life, and it's not that it's not that the answer to how to succeed and get the objective in the video game is within you, but it's inherent within the whole environment, within the whole situation, right? It's rigged for you to succeed. So I look at it as it's not like the answer is in the universe or in God or in me, but the whole situation's rigged so that problems have solutions. Here's another thing that I at some point wanted to say to you guys, and I'll say it here, and it's not that it'll be the only place. Usually when we'll just take for granted that in discussions, this part of each webinar, it'll be often that I'll say something here that I'll also put inside of a lesson at some point. But we don't, and that also means I won't necessarily develop something fully when I say it in a discussion, but I might indicate to it, which helps give you the question, right? But I'm about to make a statement that's kind of a statement that I intended to make at some point. You want to not think of the world as choreographed, and people sometimes do, or often do, and they say, oh, I believe that God did this for a reason, or if someone gets cancer, it's for a reason, or a child died at 4, it's to teach us a lesson, or if a child, people want to find like a choreographed reason to cope with things. But there's the problem with viewing the world as choreographed is there's a whole bunch of drawbacks to that. which again I'm not even going to, you can work them out for yourself, or I'll get to them later. And it's just not true that the world is choreographed. The world is rigged. Again, and I didn't figure this out from the video game metaphor. I don't figure anything out from a metaphor, because metaphors, and this is another important statement, metaphors inherently, what's the nature of a metaphor? A metaphor has similarities to whatever the real thing is you're being metaphorical to, but it also has differences. It's not the exact same thing, right? When you say life is like a bunch of chocolates or a box of chocolates, then there's a way that life might be similar to a box of chocolates, right, that you never know what you're going to find, but there's a whole bunch of ways that life is not identical to a bunch of chocolates. That's why it's a metaphor, right? Like life doesn't taste like chocolate. And it can't all be put inside a box and given as a gift to someone else, right? Anyhow, so because metaphors have similarities but also differences, you don't want to use metaphors to discover things about something else, because you don't know what's similar and what's different if you're trying to discover something about something else. Anyhow, so I have a few open loops here, but I didn't use the video game metaphor to figure out about the choreographed versus rigged, but I can use it to explain to you that similarly, when you're playing a game, that's a game that you're playing a character and that you can win eventually because of the way the game is set up. You might, your character might get killed a bunch of times, but then eventually you gain skill, or you have a bunch of lives and you can win, right, theoretically, if you stick with it. It's rigged so that you can win if you just behave competently and keep going, right? But it's not choreographed. The guy that made the game isn't sitting there interacting with your computer making sure that you win in that game life, right? Or that nothing bad happens to your guy, so you just waltz through the whole game without anything, right, where you automatically win. And neither is it even programmed in that the computer game compensates for if you miss a bad guy, it doesn't like make the bullet swerve and go and hit him instead. It's not choreographed, but it's rigged for you to succeed, and that's how you want to understand life. And this is just a standalone statement I'm making now, and I plan to, again, when it goes into a monologue, then I'll be ready with developing it more at the right time. But in our discussion part, then I'll just say certain things that are on my mind, and that's one of them. That life, again, is rigged. You want to view it as rigged, but often people view it neither as one of two mistakes. They'll and when they make either mistake, they'll tend to also make the other mistake, because it's too hard to cope, since it's false. It's too hard to cope with the idea that the world's choreographed all the time, because it's too hard. Like it just doesn't. Since it's false, it also doesn't make sense. Like that God gave me this pain and God made this guy die early. Like it's too hard to come up with a good explanation for everything happening. So then people will feel like the world is just chaotic, or maybe we can't win, right? Maybe all we can do is make the world better in small ways and then die eventually, right? So people waffle between it's not rigged at all, and at the end of things, or there's just, it's not rigged for us to do anything. It's just God from the machine, so to speak, comes down and just makes everything fine for some people and screws everybody else, or whatever, however it ends. It's something other than that it's rigged for everyone to succeed. But it is rigged for everyone to succeed. Not choreographed, we're not screwed. It isn't that there's no way to win. And similarly, problems have solutions. But the solution isn't going to be that you ask the question and the next impulse or intuition you have is necessarily correct. Intuition in gray areas of life where you can't know one way or the other, your first impulse might be more correct than your third impulse, and that might be measurable. But it's still not the case that the feeling of intuition of an answer that feels just perfect, and it comes to you, you're taking a shower, and you're like, oh my goodness, that still might not be right. The world's not choreographed in that way. You find out whether it's right by thinking accurately, involving scenarios and more. Very profound twist, I'm glad. Yeah, it's a terrific, it's accurate, and it's a terrific way to look at the world. If you play it out in a scenario, how you would act, how you would live your life, if you consistently act on it being rigged, but that not choreographed. Choreographed is like, doesn't really matter what you do, right, and so forth. It's not rigged so that if you're incompetent, and you just don't care, you don't try, you don't seek, that that it'll be okay. Now, eventually, we want everyone to be okay by leading them to realize that they can think accurately, really, and so forth. So there's a path that we can help everyone eventually. But But anyhow, rigged, not choreographed. If we act on the idea that it's rigged, isn't that most effective? If you play a computer game thinking that, like generally that's how people play computer games, and obviously it's the most effective. We presume that there's a way to win, to get the final objective, and obviously that again is just most effective way to play the game, is to figure that if you keep at it and learn, you'll do it. You don't just sit there and not without touching the controller and expect your little computer guy to win, right? Neither do you just give up. Of course, an individual person might decide not to play a particular game, but you don't just say generally that there's no way to win, right? And some people might with some video games, but you understand that a person who succeeds at a video game correctly gets that it's rigged, and that's a great way to go through life. And take it to the extreme, it still works. That's another hint that I'll give you, or that I'll plan to cover in the next webinar or two. Is one way to test an idea is to take it to the extreme. Does it work in the most extreme circumstance? And when I test the idea of the world being rigged that way, it does. I'm not going to go through it right now, but at least as far as I've gotten so far, then that's what I've seen. David, your response of the semi-soft lock versus the hard lock and versus the soft lock as well was an aha moment for me, right? There's three things. There's a semi-soft lock, which is like a small advantage in chess, like just a pawn ahead, or not even a pawn ahead, maybe a certain setup that if you get to, that if you're competent, you can take it to the win. You want to find that smallest thing. That's a semi-soft lock. A soft lock is you're up by like a queen and a pawn, or a queen or a bishop, which is better than a queen and a pawn, of course. That's a soft lock where you don't automatically win, but it's super easy to win at that point. All you have to do is not be incredibly incompetent once you have a soft lock. But most people, and again, I'm just repeating myself just as a quick review because it's such a great concept. The soft lock is pretty obvious to people. The distinction is not between the soft lock and the hard lock. That's how people usually think of it. The hard lock is like you win just so overwhelmingly that it doesn't even matter. You can be totally incompetent and still win. The soft lock is what most people realize and what they go for. The soft lock with achieving answers to questions is usually people look for a source to give them the answer, rather than they realize that just getting the answer is like the hard lock. They're like, where's the source? That's what they realize to go for. The semi-soft lock is you keep searching to get just the right question. And great. And so there's three things: semi-soft lock, soft lock, hard lock. Most people understand to go for the soft lock, but the dope distinction, or the great distinction here, is to go for the semi-soft lock and to go all in on it. Normally people will kind of go all in on the soft lock instead, and sometimes not achieve it. Right? You can easily picture in chess that if there's a certain setup that you can identify that you can go for, and you go all in on getting that setup, you can achieve that more frequently than if you go all in on getting ahead by a queen. Right? You see that the soft lock is more out of your control. And going all in on it, you still might not achieve it nearly as frequently as the semi-soft lock. Great, but that's an aha moment for Webb. In connecting the dots, the understanding of the framework is more important to me versus just knowing what the end result is supposed to be. Right. Knowing to get a foothold or a framework is easier than sometimes whatever else people want to try to do. Or like knowing to get a framework, like finding like a foothold for a framework is all you have to do. And then if you're just competent from there, you'll master whatever you're trying to master generally. If you're going to focus, you get a foothold. From the foothold, you build a framework. From the framework, you assemble the details and the way. Love Boggle. Let's play. That's great. I haven't played it for so many years. Sadly enough, like almost any game like that, I don't really get that into these days. Thank you. The semi-soft lock idea was a splinter in my mind that I was searching for about how to quit my job and dedicate. Excellent. Excellent. You were searching for, and you found it today. That's awesome news. Okay, I can try to check into this Rupert Sheldrake's idea around consciousness as morphic resonating fields. But you want to watch, because it might turn out to be the same thing, but normally, I don't know, normally people don't end up with the proper distinction of, like, there's a conscious being that's conscious. Notice I don't really talk in terms of consciousness so much as a consciousness field. Anyway, I can check that out too, very possibly. Thank you, David Mills, for your time and knowledge and sharing. I look forward to applying alchemy to my career and life. Yeah, oh my, looks like we're hitting the 3-hour mark again, so I'll wrap things up just about now. Have I looked into Six Sigma? No, but I'm aware, all I know about it is that it tends to revolve, I believe, if I have it right, around bottlenecks. And yeah, like people will discover applications of parts of alchemy like this. Basically, if you organize your strategy around breaking bottlenecks, then you'll instantly become one of the best strategists out there. And if you're in a group of people, they basically won't strategize that way, believe it or not. And they might meander into it and then meander back out here and there, but they won't just focus in on what's the next bottleneck. They'll more try to like come up with a step-by-step action plan or whatever. They'll, one way or the other, they'll tend to go on for the soft lock, right? Not the semi-soft lock. There's another way of putting it, another angle on it. As always, mind blown. Mahalo, this is gold, and love the MP3s too. Excellent. You are very welcome. Oh, and I haven't forgotten about the transcripts. We have those. I'll probably just put them in raw form because editing them is a bit of a bottleneck that we're not kind of a priority to break right now. And I might get that done too at some point, but I'll probably just put them in raw form, which won't be that appropriate if you haven't listened to it. But if as a review or as a search function or something, then it can very much be helpful. And there'll be sometimes some words missing that might be important, or even Mike said sometimes there'll be a word change that changes the meaning of the statement. If you've listened to a recording and then you're using the transcript, the raw transcript as a supplement, then it can be great. Just to warn you on that. I don't know if it's like Stoic scenarios. Great. I will pretty much wrap it up here, one way or the other. Wise guy. Oh, that's funny, referring to the game Boggle. Alchemy boggles the mind, shake it up and find new combinations. And you're welcome, Shally. Excellent. Okay, guys, good for now. Thank you. Oh, that's nice. Jen wrote, totally agree with life being rigged to win. I really loved your video game analogy. I think this idea also supports the belief of multiple lives. Yep. And I'm not trying to push that belief on anyone. I'm not trying. That's not part of alchemy. It's not part of. It's the idea that it maybe it's correct is part of my philosophy, but I'm not. It's not something that I'm trying to convince anyone of or not. I'm not fully convinced of it or not. Although I do pretty much figure that acting on it works pretty well. Sometimes I feel tired trying to sort through all of this and want to settle, but it seems like a path that once you start to see certain truths, there's no turning around. Exactly. That's the reason why I think it's realistic for us to catalyze a permanent change in the world that's real and massive, because there's certain things about these ideas where once you get them, there's no going back. And if you can make progress in a way that there's no going back, I think you can win. Right? I think we can win and really transform the world in a certain way. Get rid of if people can understand how to dissolve contradictions and think about at least certain things with a certain accuracy, then that can keep snowballing and we can get there. And yeah, it's all based on the idea of making progress that's permanent, that we can stack with. Yeah, alchemy. Well, I'll have it recorded. It'll be out there, right? Can carry over if we have multiple lives. You're very welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. And wonderful. Every time we have these great discussions, and it's really terrific. So this whole thread is just nuts every time. It's terrific. And week after week, we have a lot of sessions together, but people are really sticking. I appreciate you guys sticking with me. And of course, I'm sticking with you, and I'm working each week on this. Oh. Ah! Little scream. Is it offensive to stray? Little womanly scream there. Just joking on myself. Click. But just doing a little last minute saying goodbye to people and thanking people. Yeah, the discussion's amazing, right, Mike? It's always hard stopping listening to David unravel contradictions live. Don't want to totally stop your heart, Mike. Don't want any accidents here, but excellent. I appreciate that, Mike, very much. You're very welcome, Bryce. You're welcome, Jeremy. We got a new Snoopy from Michael. Excellent. Wouldn't be complete without Snoopy making an appearance. I know he made one earlier as well. You're very welcome, guys. All right, I will end it here. And excellent.